Good morning, everyone. Welcome to today's hearing. Today we're going to hear evidence about the operation and organisation of London Resilience. Yes, Mr.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, good morning. Good morning, members of the panel. I now call Mr. John Hetherington, please.
Good morning, Mr. Hetherington. I gather you're going to take the oath.
That's right.
There should be a testament there. Would you take it in your right hand, please, and read the words on the screen?
I swear by Almighty God that the evidence I shall give shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
Thank you very much. Now, please sit down and make yourself comfortable. Yes, Mr. Millett.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Hetherington, good morning.
Good morning.
Can I start by thanking you very much for coming here to the inquiry and assisting us with our investigations? We're extremely grateful to you. During the course of your evidence, I shall be asking you many questions. If at any point you don't understand the question or you wish me to repeat it, I can repeat it or I can rephrase it, as the case may be. Can I ask you please also to keep your voice up so that the person who sits to your right over there can get down everything you're saying clearly? Don't nod or shake your head. You have to say yes or no, as the case may be. Right? And during the course of the day today, we will be taking breaks mid-morning and mid-afternoon. But of course, if you need a break at any other time, we can take a break.
Thank you.
Now, you have given us three statements, and they will appear, as will everything else that I'm going to ask you to look at on the screen in front of you on your desk. Your first inquiry statement is LFB 000061158. Can we please have that up? Is that the first page, dated the 18th of October 2019?
Yes, it is.
Page 36, please.
Yes, it is.
Is that your signature?
Yes.
If we can go, please, to the second statement, LFB 00119130. It's dated the 3rd of December. Is that the first page of that statement?
Yes.
Thank you. And if you go, please, to page 48, you'll see a signature. Is that your signature?
Yes, it is.
Above the date, thank you. And then the third statement, that's at LFB 001237664. It's dated the 4th of March 2022, as you can see. And if we please go to page 7 in it, you can see a signature above that date. Is that your signature?
Yes, it is.
And have you read each of these statements recently?
Yes.
And can you confirm that each of them contains the truth?
Yes.
Is true in its entirety, I should
Yes.
say. Yes, thank you. Now, I'm going to be asking you a number of things about London Resilience, starting with your career history. We're then going to look at the structure of London Resilience, the assessment of risk, the emergency plans, training, the response of the London Resilience system, and reviews after the fire. As I said, there are 7 topics to cover. And I'm going to begin with the first of those, your background and career history. Now, it's right to think, isn't it, that at least according to your first witness statement, paragraph 4, since 2007 you've worked in emergency planning.
That's right.
And before 2007, did you have any experience of working in emergency planning?
No.
None. And between 2007 and 2010, I think it's right, isn't it, that you held the positions of interim head of emergency planning and deputy head of a joint emergency planning service for local authorities?
That's right.
Yes. And then in 2010, is this right, that you joined the London Fire Brigade as deputy head of emergency planning?
That's correct.
And then in 2016, you were appointed the deputy head of London Resilience.
London Resilience Group, yes.
London Resilience Group. So is it right that at the time of the fire at Grenfell Tower on the 14th of June 2017, you had about 10 years of experience of emergency planning in London?
That's right, yes.
Yes. And can we take it that you were experienced in planning for emergencies at the time of the fire?
Yes.
But what actual experience did you have of responding to actual emergencies as at June 2017?
Whilst in a local authority, I responded to local incidents as the emergency planning manager there, supporting and coordinating the local authority's response and advising the chief executive on response for a number of small-scale incidents. Since 2010, when I joined London Fire Brigade Emergency Planning, I was a duty LAC manager, so the London Local Authorities Coordination Centre duty manager, and responded to a number of incidents where we supported the local authority gold arrangements as per our role.
And you say local incidents. Can you give us an idea of the size or complexity of the incidents in which you had on-the-ground experience?
Localised flooding, so maybe up to 40, 50 properties perhaps, opening a rest centre out of hours, or coordinating the opening of a rest centre out of hours, and working with local authority services in response to localised flooding, as I said, or small-scale explosions was another incident that springs to mind.
Right. And roughly how many actual incidents which called for your expertise in this respect do you think, roughly, you attended in the 7 years between 2010 and 2017?
In a local authority itself, probably somewhere in a dozen, perhaps, in those 3 years. Whilst at London Fire Brigade, probably slightly more, and also experienced during the Olympics, running as one of the duty managers in the London Operations Centre as well.
Now, at the time of the Grenfell Tower fire, is it right that you were one of 3 deputy heads of London Resilience?
That's correct.
And you took that role on, as I think you said, in June 2016, a year before the Grenfell Tower fire?
That's correct.
Yes. And is it right the 2 other deputy heads of London Resilience were Toby Gould and Hamish Cameron?
That's correct.
And the head of programme at the time of the fire was Steve Ham, yes?
That's correct, yes.
Is the head of programme the same as head of London Resilience, or is it different?
No, it is the same.
It's the same?
Yeah.
And that's the same role as you hold now?
Yes.
So Steve Ham was your successor?
Yes.
Your
predecessor.
Yes. And as head of Resilience, do you have overall responsibility and oversight for the London Resilience Group?
Yes.
So LRG?
Yes.
Yes. And as deputy head of London Resilience Group at the time of the fire, were you employed by the London Fire Brigade at that point?
That's correct.
You
yes.
were. Can you explain why it is, or why it was, that London Resilience Group staff, such as you at the time, were employed by the London Fire Brigade, LFB?
Dating when I joined London Fire Brigade, I was part of a team entitled London Fire Brigade Emergency Planning. We supported local authorities, and that was because London, or LFEPA as was, so the London Fire and Emergency Planning Authority, had a role to support local authorities directly, and that spanned back to the civil defence era, when it had a role to support through the London Local Authority Coordination Centre. That's written into Chapter 9 of the guidance to the CCA, the London arrangements, LFEPA's specific task. In parallel, in 2010, when the government offices for London were dismantled, the London Resilience team, as was then, which was a civil servant team, moved into the GLA and was taken on. So there were 2 teams in parallel, the London Resilience team in the GLA, which looked after all of the multi-agency work and the support to the forum, and the London Fire Brigade Emergency Planning team. In 2014, 15, and eventually what took place in April 2016, the merger of the 2 teams, the London Resilience team and London Fire Brigade Emergency Planning team, took place to form the London Resilience Group. And as such, we were hosted by London Fire Brigade, partly to provide us operational support and that 24/7 backup, as opposed to the kind of more policy and administration services in the Greater London Authority.
Right, and I think we'll look at elements of what you've just told us as we go through your evidence. If I can turn then to your responsibilities, is it right that as head of, or deputy head of London Resilience at the time of the fire, you were responsible for supporting local authorities, risk assessment and assurance?
That's correct.
And that included, I think, the local authorities panel, the LAP, yes?
Yes.
And the LAPIG, the local authorities panel and implementation group.
That's correct.
Right. And I think also, as you tell us in your statement, paragraph 5 of your first statement, preparedness and standards, London Local Authority goal arrangements, partnership risk assessment, exercising and assurance.
That's correct.
That's a list. I think it's in your statement. Now, can I then turn to the structure of London Resilience? Now, we'll look at these in more detail as we go, but can I first examine with you the structure as it stood on the 14th of June 2017, and particularly examining the London Resilience Group, LRG, the London Resilience Partnership, LRP, and the London Resilience Forum, or LRF. Now, is it right that first, standing back from even those constituent elements, that London Resilience is an umbrella term or an overarching term which encompasses all three elements?
That's right. It's almost a kind of brand, if you like, for the ethos that we're trying to achieve.
A brand for the ethos. Right. And now, before we dive deeply into the various structures, would you accept at the outset that the London Resilience structure, which we've seen already and looks something like that, is complicated?
Yes.
It is. Dealing first with the London Resilience Group, then, LRG, is it right that that has dedicated members of staff whereas the partnership and the forum don't?
Sorry, I don't understand.
Well, is it right that LRG has got a dedicated team of staff, a full-time staff,
yeah,
whereas the LRP and the LRF don't?
Yes, so the London Resilience Group is the staff that support the London Resilience Forum. Again, the London Resilience Partnership isn't a legal partnership by any stretch. It is those organisations that are constituted through the CCA, the Civil Contingencies Act, to make up the membership of the forum. Yes.
So the LRP and the LRF are groups of entities or other groups?
Yes.
Yes. Now, I think you said that the London Resilience Group was at the time hosted by the LFB, yes?
Yes, that's correct.
Would it be fair to summarise the LRG as the muscle, as it were, in the London Resilience structure by virtue of the fact that it has a full-time staff?
That's not how we described ourselves, but I understand what you mean, yes.
I mean, it's the muscle. By muscle, I mean it's the thing which moves the other parts of the structure.
It's the coordinating body, yes,
Right.
the support, the business support and administration structure.
Right.
Now, how would you describe it then? I mean, I'm currently getting a picture of a group of staff, maybe sitting in the same room, maybe not, all employed by LFB to do a particular job in relation to London Resilience.
So we're employed by London Fire Brigade. We're hosted in effect by London Fire Brigade. Our funding was.
Yeah, but hosting means what? I mean, it provides you with physical accommodation. Physical
accommodation, the support, the kind of legal framework and administrative support, so pay, rations, HR, administration. Okay. We work on behalf of the London Resilience Forum and also the local authorities. So our funding was three streams primarily. The local authorities for the duties outlined within Chapter 9 of the Civil Contingencies Act, which they paid funding for. The GLA pay funding through an SLA with the London Fire Brigade for carrying out the responsibilities as the Secretariat to the London Resilience Forum, and then the London Fire Brigade picked up the remainder for that hosting.
Right. Thank you.
Now, if we go to your first witness statement, please, paragraph 11 on page 4, you've got some bullet points there set out, and you've set out there a list of tasks which the LRG carries out. I just want to ask you about two of them. Mm-hmm. Looking at the first one, promote preparedness and awareness of risks. How did the LRG do that?
Within the structure, there are underneath the LRF, or rather underneath the programme board, which directs the work of the forum, there are three standing groups: the London Risk Advisory Group, the Training and Exercising Group, and a Learning and Implementation Group. So with the London Risk Advisory Group, we took on the Secretariat and the role to convene and compile the London Risk Register, which we then agree through the London Resilience Forum, share with all partners and publicise on the london.gov.uk website.
And if you look at the second bullet point down, it says coordinate development of multi-agency capabilities, ensuring consistency in the development and maintenance of London's plans. How did the LRG do that?
So we have a work programme, a systematic work programme for the capabilities derived from the risk register, whether they be generic or specific to risk, that we attempted. We didn't always achieve, but we attempted to have a 3-year rolling cycle for the update of the 20 plus capabilities that London held at a pan-London multi-agency level. So they're the duties that we hold underneath the workings of the LRF, which is to provide a community risk register and a systematic approach for Category 1 responders to discharge their duties in respect of multi-agency planning.
And in this 3-year rolling cycle for the update, this was an update of the London Risk Register, was it?
No, the London Risk Register is published annually and had a periodical update. We had a programme of work within its policy that all risks would be reviewed on a 2-year cycle. So we chunked the risks down, and the London Risk Advisory Group met 4 times a year and would take a number of those risks. The 3-year rolling programme was for each of the capabilities that were then derived out of either the risk assessment or direction from central government in terms of generic expected capabilities for an adult.
And when doing the review, under the 3-year rolling cycle of the 20 plus capabilities, did you try and match the risk register as reviewed with the capabilities that London was offering at a pan-London multi-agency level?
Yes, so it's probably also important to say we provide the secretariat and the support and if you like, the kind of the muscle behind it in terms of actually putting pen to paper. But the principle was that for each of the risks, a lead agency would be assigned, and that would be that agency, a Category 1 responder's responsibility to lead the risk assessment and provide the interpretation and advised scoring utilising the local risk assessment guidance provided by the Cabinet Office. Then the wider group, which was Category 1 and 2 responders from across the forum, would agree those scores to compile the overall risk register. In terms of each of the capabilities, again, there was a lead agency assigned with an SRO, a senior responsible officer who was a member of the forum from that particular agency, and it was that agency's responsibility to update and maintain the plan. Our role was to, one, provide the consistency, as we say, so that they look and felt the same way, but also to bring together the contextualisation of London through a piece of work that we had to try and enable people to understand the fabric and makeup of London on a wide basis, the risk assessment detail, the planning assumptions, any lessons that were in conjunction with that particular framework that had been identified either through exercising or incident beforehand, and to support the lead agency in bringing other partners in as necessary, and if required, putting pen to paper and supporting that kind of formatting process.
So in general, I think it's right, standing back perhaps a bit further than I've been inviting you to do, that the LRG essentially performed a support function, supporting the LRF in the exercise of its own functions.
Absolutely.
Then turning to the LRP, that brings together 170 organisations. Yes?
Yeah, at least 170.
At least 170, you say. So it's essentially an umbrella organisation.
Absolutely. I wouldn't describe it as an organisation, an umbrella term for all of those agencies. So rather than us constantly saying all Category 1 and 2 responders under the Civil Contingencies Act, we just gave it a blanket terminology of the London Resilience Partnership.
I see. And those 170 organisations were a fairly disparate group of faith organisations, voluntary groups, but also the DCLG.
Most importantly, the Category 1 and 2 responders, and then through the sector panels, we brought in the faith responders, the voluntary sector, business sector, military, DCLG, as you say.
Right. So LRP comprised the statutory responders, so Category 1 and 2.
Yes.
But also non-statutory.
Yes.
Yeah.
In effect, all of those under the CCA who were, by virtue, members of the forum, but couldn't all attend the forum and needed some form of representation at the forum, because we can't simply have 170 people around a table at a forum-style meeting.
And is it right that most of the organisations within the LRP, including those with specific responsibilities for preparing and responding to emergencies, included the emergency services, local councils, the NHS and utilities as well?
Yes, absolutely.
I think utilities were category 2, yes?
Yes.
Yes. And just to be clear, so that others listening can be clear about it, category 1 responders, is this right, are those who are core to an emergency response, such as the blue light services and the NHS?
Absolutely. And just to go back in terms of the lead agency principle, which is why I kind of questioned the muscle aspect, actually the bulk of resource came from all of those agencies who had their own emergency planning team and were the ones responsible for discharging their duties. We were that support element through administration and business management behind them.
Right, and that included the local authority as well?
Yes.
Yes, and then category 2 responders are those who are cooperating bodies, such as the Health and Safety Executive, transport, utility companies?
Yes, that's right.
And I think it's right that the category 1 and 2 responders are defined by law in the Civil Contingencies Act
correct.
itself, yes. And is it right that, would you say, the backbone of London resilience and civil resilience generally is the Civil Contingencies Act and its associated framework?
Yes.
Yes. And to summarise, therefore, the category 1 and 2 responders, plus additional organisations, such as the voluntary and faith sectors, make up the London Resilience Partnership?
That's correct.
Right. Did the LRP, the London Resilience Partnership, have any specific functions as a group?
No, it's not a legal entity or anything else. The specific functions come from the role of the London Resilience Forum. So it's another term for the membership of the London Resilience Forum, because 170 organisations, as I said, we can't put all of those around a table. So the London Resilience Forum had approximately 30 attendees through the structure of the partnership. So, for example, NHS organisations, there's probably 80 plus NHS acute trusts, clinical commissioning groups, all category 1, but they're represented by NHS England and Improvement at a regional level, at a London level, and that's their representation at the forum. But they all make up that membership of the partnership. Their direct a representation at the forum is through a single place. So that's the London Health and Resilience panel. Likewise, the local authorities panel, the 33 local authorities, or the 32 plus the Common Council, are represented by the local authorities panel.
Yes, I see. And then let's turn to the LRF, the London Resilience Forum itself. If we look at your first statement, please, at paragraph 8 on page 3, back a page, we can see there that you say at the top of the screen, LRFs were formed within each police force area as a result of the Civil Contingencies Act 2004, CCA. The CCA and its associated regulations provide that responders through a local resilience forum have a collective responsibility to plan, prepare and communicate in a multi-agency environment. LRFs are not legal entities and do not have powers to direct the actions of their members. Rather, they provide a means for responders with duties under the Act and its associated regulations to discharge their responsibilities collaboratively. Further details on the role of an LRF can be found in the government's reference document, The Role of an LRF, which I attach as JH2. I'm assuming that captures what a local resilience forum is.
Yes.
Yes. And just looking at it a little further, is it right that the London Resilience Forum is a local resilience forum under the Act, the CCA?
That's correct.
Right. So in London, is this right? The London Resilience Forum is the local resilience forum. What is the relationship between the London Resilience Forum and the London Resilience Partnership?
So the London Resilience Forum is the statutory body and the meeting of those organisations. The partnership is just those organisations that are members by virtue of their status within the Act, either as a Category 1, 2 responder or as a voluntary organisation, faith sector, business sector, or the military or DCLG.
So does it come to this, that the LRP is really just a description
Yes.
of those groups who are entitled to, or perhaps required to, attend at or be members of the LRF?
Yes.
Right, and it's a means by which they can be represented by their representatives at a meeting or in any functionality of the LRF.
Yes, through the sector panels, that's their representation.
Through the sector panels, and we'll come to that shortly. So just to be clear, this isn't a case where there are two separate bodies doing overlapping things.
No.
Right. Let's then turn to the Civil Contingencies Act itself, and keeping it at its simplest. I think you would agree, in London, Category 1 responders discharge their obligations under the Civil Contingencies Act collectively through the LRF.
Yes.
Yes. So Category 1 responders in London work together, is this right, within the forum, assessing the risk of a given emergency occurring in London, yes?
Yes, they discharge their collective responsibilities. Their individual responsibilities still remain that of their own organisation.
Yes. And they're required to maintain plans for emergencies collectively and individually.
And individually, yes.
And they're required to maintain arrangements to warn the public and provide information and advice to the public if an emergency is likely to occur or has occurred. Yes, that's what the statute says.
Yes.
Yes. And to publish plans or any part of plans where it's appropriate to do so.
Yes.
It's also, I think, what the Act requires.
Yes.
And then let's turn then to meetings of the London Resilience Forum, the LRF. I think it's right that it's required to meet once every 6 months, yes?
That's correct, yes.
So let's just look at that. In 2016, I think you say in your statement, page 12, paragraph, it's your second statement, paragraph 34D through to F, there were some 3 London Resilience Forum meetings, 8th of February, 13th of June and 10th of October.
That's correct. It meets 3 times a year.
Right. That one, yes, but it's supposed to meet every 6 months.
At least every 6 months.
At least every 6 months. So you had 3. And in 2017, meetings on the 6th of February, 28th of June and the 19th of October 2017. Why were meetings held more frequently than every 6 months in London in those years?
We've always had that cycle. We found that to meet twice a year, there was too much business for the forum to discuss. If we met quarterly, then we didn't have enough space in between. So if you, as you can appreciate from the description and kind of the number of organisations representing, that there's a kind of build-up to the LRF through the programme board, also the meeting of what we had in place shortly before in terms of the sub-regional resilience forums, and the work of each individual organisation and its own sector panel. We had to have some breathing space, but we wanted to keep the meetings as frequent as possible to get through the amount of business that we needed to, and make sure that there was regular touch points for all of those agencies to come together and discuss the matters at hand.
Yes, I see. Now, it's right that the LRF has a chairperson, and at the time of the Grenfell Tower fire, that was Dr. Fiona Twycross.
That's correct.
And she was chair of LFEPA, the London Fire and Emergency Planning Authority at the time.
Yeah, so under the regulations or under Chapter 9, there is a specific arrangement in London that the mayor is the de facto chair of the London Resilience Forum, and he discharges that through his deputy mayor, or at the time the chair of LFEPA. And that's been a long-standing arrangement since 2010.
That was the case at the time of the fire, was it?
That's correct.
I see. And is it right that at the time of the fire, the deputy chair of the LRF was John Barradell?
That's correct.
And he was chief executive of the City of London?
That's correct.
Which was an LA?
Yes.
Yes,
that's correct.
Local authority. Now, we're going to hear from John Barradell in due course, but could you just clarify for us, was it a requirement in the arrangements for London in 2016 to 17 for all Category 1 responders to attend London Resilience Forum meetings?
Attend or have representation at?
Well, attend through representatives.
Yes.
It was?
Yeah.
Right. And let's just make that perhaps a little clearer for the panel. If we can go to your second statement, where we can see a bit more detail on this, page 2, we'll find paragraph 5, your second statement at LFB 00119130, page 2, paragraph 5, where the question is about a chief officer group. And you say there that reference to a chief officer group, COG, in paragraph 9.4 of the Chapter 9 guidance provided by the Cabinet Office and exhibited to my original statement as JH11, is in practice a reference to the London Resilience Forum, LRF. This is clear from the regulations produced under the Civil Contingencies Act 2004, which describes 2 annual local resilience forum meetings as meetings of the COG. This is because, practically speaking, it's only the senior officers of the Category 1 and relevant Category 2 responders who are required to attend meetings along with chairs of various sector panels who are themselves senior representatives, although chief officers will sometimes delegate to other officers to attend their LRF on their behalf. So, more terminology. Is it right that the meetings are described as COG meetings? The 4 monthly meetings of the LRF are described as COG meetings?
Not within London. I think the chief officer group is something that is referenced within government guidance, but we've always just used the terminology of the London Resilience Forum.
I follow. So elsewhere in the country they're COG meetings, but in London they're LRF meetings?
Yes.
Right.
I can't speak for how they are described in other parts of the country.
No, fair enough. Let me put the question slightly differently. In the guidance, these meetings, the forum meetings, are described as COG meetings, but in London you call them LRF meetings.
That's correct.
Right. Now, in the brackets, 4 lines up from the bottom of the paragraph, you say Category 1 and relevant Category 2 responders who are required to attend meetings. Who are the relevant ones as opposed to the irrelevant ones?
So Category 2 responders have the right to attend or we have the right to invite to each of the meetings. In London, we have them as standing members from the utilities sector panel, voluntary sector panel, business sector panel. Sorry, they're not Category 2, the transport sector panel.
So you select Category 2 attendees, yes, for attendance?
No, there is a right to invite or right to attend various Category 2 responders, but in London we hold them as standing members of the forum. So the utilities sector have a representation through their utilities sector panel, and they are represented at the meeting rather than having every utility company that serves London around the table. They are represented through the chair of that panel. Likewise, the transport operators, who are all Category 2 responders, have a transport sector panel who would meet outside of the forum, discuss the business relevant to their sector, and be represented through a single representative at the forum meeting.
Yes. I'm not quite sure my question's getting home. You say the relevant Category 2 responders. Were there some Category 2 responders who either routinely did not attend meetings because they weren't required to, and if so, who were they?
No, they were represented by their sector panel.
I think what you're telling us is that in the case of London,
Yeah.
there were no irrelevant, in that sense, Category 2 responders, because you kept them all as standing members.
That's correct.
And if I've understood it correctly, and this is me personally, the members of the LRP are grouped into sectors by reference to their particular functions.
That's correct, yes.
They discuss their own aspects of the business internally, and they then send one person to the LRF meeting.
That's correct, yes.
Right.
Thank you.
That's helpful. Thank you. And how are Category 1 responders represented at the LRF? Is it through the LAP?
For local authorities, that's correct, yes.
And what about the other Category 1 responders?
So each of the emergency services has attends in their own right.
Right.
Although there is a blue light panel as well, but they each attend in their own right. And NHS is represented by NHS England and Improvement, and Public Health represents itself.
Right, I see. Let's then turn to the LAP. But within the London Resilience Forum, I think there are 8 sector panels, yes?
Yes.
One of those panels is the local authorities panel.
That's correct.
In fact, let's have up the document which I showed the panel in opening this module, LFB 000061162, page 7. It's probably easier just to work from what I'm showing you on the screen. If we can have it enlarged, thank you. That's the structure, and you can see, I think, 8 sector panels at the time of the fire. Yes.
Yes, that's correct.
Ranged around the top. Now, as one of those panels, we see the LAP, the third up from the bottom on the left, at about 10 o'clock. Mm-hmm. Yes.
Yes, that's correct.
Does that sector panel represent the local authorities at the LRF?
That's correct.
Right. And so, as far as the makeup of the LAP is concerned, I think it's right that John Barradell, the deputy chair of the LRF, chaired the LAP at the time.
That's correct.
Right. Now, the rest of the local authorities panel, as you can see, is made up of 6 chief executives. Well, you can't see it from this, I don't think, but is it right that it was made up of 6 regional, 6 chief executives from each of the 6 sub-regional reliance forums, which made up the sub-regional resilience tier?
That's correct.
And we can see that at about 8 o'clock on the structure.
That's correct.
Now, we'll come back in due course to the sub-regional resilience tier shortly, but in dealing with the LAP for the moment, there are, as you say, 6 local authority chief executives, is this right, who are on the LAP together with John Barradell as the chair?
That's correct, plus the chief executive of London Councils, a practitioner advisor, the chair of the local authorities panel implementation group as well, and then ourselves as secretariat support, and I think at the time we also had the Inner London West Coroner as a standing member.
Yes,
as well.
Yes, and you say ourselves as secretariat support. That's the LRG.
That's correct. Yes.
Right, and the chief executive of London Councils, and I hesitate to add another acronym, but we do see it as known as the CELC. Is that correct?
No, CELC is the chief executives of London chapter, I think.
Oh,
I'm not entirely sure. So CELC is the meeting of all London chief executives that takes place on a 4 to 6 week basis that covers all local authority business. The chief executive of London Councils was John O'Brien, and that's London Councils as the lobbying body.
Yes. Well, we'll come to that, I think, in due course as well. You mentioned the coroner. I think the coroner represents all coroners in London.
That's correct. Yes.
And there's also, I think, a representative of the Director of Public Health. Did you mention that?
That's correct. Yeah.
Yes.
I didn't mention it, but yes, that is correct.
That's correct. What about the DCLG? Would that also be on the LAP?
I can't recall if they were at the time, but they certainly are now. Apologies, but yes, they quite possibly could have been members of the panel at the time. It would be in the terms of reference if they were.
I ask you because, well, let's look at what John Barradell says, please. Can we have his first witness statement up? GOL.
Well, before we lose the diagram on the screen, I see that at about 7 o'clock there was a box headed Government, CLG and Military. So I'd rather assume that CLG were there, but...
So that's representatives of the forum. So these are all the representatives of the forum that you see. So each of those sector panels contributing to the forum, the military and government sit as members of the London Resilience Forum, but not necessarily, they wouldn't necessarily sit within the local authorities panel. Certainly the military.
Not within the local authorities panel.
No, but at the forum, yes, you're correct.
Yes. Can I just see if I can tease this out then? Can we go to John Barradell's statement? We'll come back to the structure in a moment, but or perhaps leave it on the screen so as to be helpful. But if we can have up at the same time John Barradell's first statement, GOL 401706, page 2. Page 2, paragraph 4, and there's a list of names there, and these are. Let's go back to page 1, at the foot of page 1, so we know what this is. This is a list of members of the local authorities panel as at June 2017. and this is Barradell 2. And if we go back to page 2, please, you'll see there in the list the penultimate name at the pre-penultimate name at the bottom, just above your name, Marsha Osivemwu, Department of Communities and Local Government, Resilience and Emergencies Division. So it looks from this list as if the LAP did have on it some representation from central government.
Yes, that's correct.
That's correct, is it? Thank you. Now, is the remit of the LAP to represent all 33 London local authorities on the LR or in the LRF?
So that's its remit in relation to the LRF, but also its wider remit is to support the collective resilience arrangements of local government in London.
But how would it do that other than through the LRF?
Because it would look after the specific to local government business in relation to resilience. So where there were economies of scale to be met through collective planning for local government specific tasks or kind of duties under the Act, where, as I said before, we had the lead responder principle. So local government had the responsibility for a number of the capabilities within the LRF or the plans of the LRF and the partnership. So it would be for the local authorities panel to decide how they would be achieved and broken down, and that was the purpose also of the LAP implementation group, to actually oversee and manage that work so that the work wasn't replicated 33 times but could be achieved in a common way where possible across the 33 boroughs.
Right. So do I take it from that answer that the LAP had essentially two functions facing different ways, one facing into the LRF and one facing out to each of the 33, and indeed all of the 33 local authorities, to assist each one either individually or collectively with their own local resilience arrangements? Is that a fair way of...
Yeah, I'm just not necessarily I suppose yes, to assist each of the individual boroughs, but so that they can work as a collective, so that there's some kind of consistency. Yeah. So that's where the minimum standards for London were born through the local authorities panel. That's their initiative, a way to represent or kind of digest the work on behalf of local authorities. They had 7 or 8 of the frameworks that local authorities had to produce, that they could be broken down into the sub-regional areas, so that an area could lead on a piece of work on behalf of all local authorities, as an example of how they worked and operated.
Right. Now, just looking at this more closely, was it the case that not all London, or not each of the 33 London local authorities had a seat at the LRF?
No, because they were represented through the local authorities panel.
Through the 6?
They were de facto members, if you like, but that representation was through the panel.
And is this right, that the 33 LAs were represented on the LAP and therefore through the LRF by the 6 sub-regional chief executives?
Yes, that's correct.
Yes, I see. And how did the chief executives, these 6 sub-regional chief executives who sat on the LAP, share the knowledge with other chief executives who didn't sit on the LAP?
So we had the sub-regional tier, which brought together the BRF. So I'll be clear at the outset, that was a multi-agency tier at the time and was subsequently reinforced as local authority only to bring that together. But there were different ways in which each of the sub-regions did that, but it's quite regular for local authorities to act collegiately in sub-regional groupings. Now, they're not always coterminous for different subjects, topics, but there was an expectation, and quite often local authority chief execs would group together to discuss important issues that they needed to speak to each other on in that local tier.
How did the chief executives who sat on the LAP share their knowledge, though? I mean, how did they disseminate that among the other chief executives of other boroughs who didn't sit on the panel? Was that through the SRR?
So there'd be a number of ways. There would either be direct communications that we would send to all chief execs on their behalf if it was a matter of LAP and sharing something to all chief executives. So that wasn't irregular that there was a communication to all chief executives. Likewise, also through all emergency planning departments as well. It was quite regular that we would email all 33 so that they're all apprised of the information. And then informally, those representative chief execs would have conversations with their colleagues within the local area.
Right. I see. Well, we'll come back in due course to the sub-regional resilience forums themselves, which I think may help to answer that question in a bit more detail. Before I do, let's take perhaps a look at some other parts of this. But is it right, the structure of the LAP changed after June 2017 when a resilience support team was created?
Yes.
And that was headed by Mark Sawyer, I think.
That's correct, yes.
Yeah. And I think you described that team in your second statement at paragraph 16 as the second secretariat with focus on business management and policy. Is that right?
That's correct, yes.
I think that provided technical support to the LAP, the LAPIG, and sub-regional groupings.
Yes, that's correct. So just in terms of the post-2017 piece, in April 2017, Mark Sawyer, who was previously a member of the London Resilience Group, then transferred and reported directly into the local authorities panel as the local authority chief executive liaison officer. So that was from April 2017.
So pre-fire.
Pre-fire, and then post-fire in the subsequent April financial year, so 2018, a larger team was established, the resilience support team.
I see. So the creation of the resilience support team was not a response to the fire?
It was not a direct response. I think it was a response to 2017 in general, as described yesterday, as that kind of watershed year in a number of incidents across London.
Yes, I see. And I think you say that the creation and expansion of the resilience support team was facilitated through increased funding contributions by individual boroughs.
That's correct.
Yes, I see. Is there any reason why that was separate to the London Resilience Group rather than sitting within a strengthened London Resilience Group?
So going back slightly to 2016, at that point, the LFIPA was an authority which had direct representation from local borough councillors on the authority. So there was some direct scrutiny, if required, of the role, the functions that LRG as then, or LFBEP as its predecessor or part predecessor, would have performed. Subsequently, with a direct deputy mayor and the LFC structure, there wasn't that direct scrutiny. So this was an opportunity for specific local authority solely vested in their interest. London Resilience Group had a widened support function in terms of both the partnership and looking after local authorities in that support function. So this gave them something dedicated and solely focused on local authority support.
I see. Right. But the functions would have overlapped, though, didn't they?
They did slightly, yes.
Right. And how was that overlap sorted out?
Through the service level agreement, there was a clear delineation of the tasks between the two groups.
I follow. Now, I want then to turn, please, to London Local Authority Gold. Is it right that the LAP had oversight of and was responsible for London Local Authority Gold, or LLAG, arrangements?
That's correct.
And in summary, is this right? The reason for the existence of the LLAG arrangement is, as you set out in your first statement at paragraph 12, if we can just go to that. I'll just ask you just to confirm this. Page 4, paragraph 12. You say the first change is touched upon. Hold on. That's the second statement. We did the first statement, page 4, paragraph 12. In the event of the most serious emergencies in London, local authorities need to work closely together and operate in a consistent way. To deliver this, they have agreed to pool decision-making authority and place it within a single chief executive, the London Local Authority Gold, LLAG, who will speak for local authorities as the pan-London response is managed. The LLAG arrangements are underpinned by a resolution passed on behalf of each London Borough Council and the Common Council of the City of London. I exhibit the resolution as JH7, which is presented as an appendix to a report which I exhibit as JH8. And then you go on to exhibit other documents. But can you just confirm for us that what you say there, as I've read out to you from paragraph 12, is correct?
That's correct.
Now, you say the LLAG arrangements are underpinned by a resolution also known as the Gold Resolution. That, I think, was ratified in 2011, wasn't it?
That's correct.
And let's just have that up. It's JH7 at LFB 30611166. Is that it?
That's correct.
And it says it's called Appendix A, Local Authority Gold Resolution, resolution passed by each London Borough Council and the Common Council of the City of London, the councils. So is it right that all 33 local authorities are parties for their own interest to the Gold Resolution and also to the Mutual Aid Memorandum of Understanding, yes?
That's correct.
And the Mutual Aid Memorandum of Understanding, let's just have that up because you also exhibit that, is at LFB 30/61169. And if you go, please, well, that's it, is it? It's Appendix C to the report, yes?
That's correct, yes.
Yeah, and if you go to page 2, you can see the statement of purpose. And the first paragraph and second paragraphs tell you what the purpose is. This agreement sets out the intentions of the local authorities listed in Appendix 1, all of which are Category 1 responders for the purposes of the Civil Contingencies Act 2004, collectively referred to as the participating authorities, to provide mutual aid and assistance to each other during an emergency or other disruptive or rising tide incidents. Each of the participating authorities will endeavour to provide assistance to another of the participating authorities in the form of provision of personnel and or equipment in the event of, or in the reasonable anticipation of, an emergency or other disruptive or rising tide incident when asked to do so in accordance with these procedures. Just to be clear, a rising tide incident was one which gradually it developed, wasn't it?
Yeah, so perhaps a flooding incident that you get a few days warning to and it slowly increases, yes.
Yes. Yes, but it's not. I mean, it's not water related solely.
Not solely, no. So we describe neither as acute shocks or so your sudden impact or rising tide.
Yes. Now, before the Grenfell Tower fire, how many times, in your experience and to your knowledge, had the Gold Resolution been activated since it was passed in 2011?
I think the only time was probably around the heavy snowfall 2008, 2009 and possibly subsequently in 2010 when mutual aid was coordinated between.
That's before 2011, that's before...
It is, so the LAG arrangements were in place, or the LAG agreement was in place. It was amended in 2010 to take account of those circumstances where before 2010 we had government offices and regional bases, so there was a kind of a definition for a regional scale emergency, I think, under the national concept of operations. That terminology was no longer in place, and it also wanted to take account of the rising tide type incident where an incident such as the snow in 2008, 2009 didn't convene an SCG per se, but there was still a need for the London Local Authority Gold arrangements to be enacted,
right,
because there was a shortage of grit. We had to invoke kind of prioritisation of those supplies across local authorities under the mutual aid agreement.
Right, but after 2011, can you think of instances where the LLAG arrangements were invoked?
Not invoked, not off the top of my head. There were instances where mutual aid was provided, but I can't remember an instance.
Let me see if I can prompt a recollection. Croydon, flooding 2014?
They were invoked, but the Croydon Borough still remained the leading responder to that through their chief executive. I think there was one point at which there was a sudden evacuation required on the 14th of February. At that point, where it flicked into, but due to the Met Police taking control centrally at Lambeth as opposed to within their borough, the London Local Authority Gold arrangements, but that was soon then passed back to the borough. But the majority of the response to the Croydon-Kenley flooding was led by Croydon Borough Council.
Right. And what about the Westminster and London Bridge attacks in the earlier part of 2017?
So a terrorist attack is slightly different. That we will. So part of the London Local Authority Gold arrangements is to provide the local authority voice, as it were, when you have a single representative from the Metropolitan Police and all of the other emergency services. For a terrorist incident, we're always conscious of secondary attacks or multiple attacks in different places, and therefore, and due to other arrangements that we bring in terms of hate crime monitoring, prevent monitoring, and all boroughs stepping up to provide that monitoring arrangements, then the local authority gold arrangements are always invoked. But in the instance of Westminster, Westminster still directly represented themselves as the local authority gold representative. The LAG was informed and also represented at the SCG on that afternoon, but took on the wider kind of prevent monitoring, hate crime monitoring aspects of it.
So does it come to this, that the Grenfell Tower fire was the first time since the LLAG Gold resolution in 2011 that the full LLAG Gold response was invoked?
Yes, there will have been other times that we called LAG or notified them of an incident, but in terms of them actually responding, then I think it is. I can't recall another time when it was invoked in that way.
Then against the background of LLAG, let's then turn to another tentacle of the London resilience structure, namely the LLACC, the London Local Authority Control Centre.
Coordination Centre.
Right.
So in Chapter 9, it is described as the provision of a control centre, but in London we have always termed it, and all of our documentation describes it as a coordination centre.
Right.
And sorry to be pernickety, but it is that coordination of the asset as opposed to any form of control over anybody else's assets.
And that helps coordinate, does it, mutual aid requests from borough to borough or borough across London?
That's correct.
Right. And facilitates the collective decision-making process, I think you say in your statement.
Yeah, so it's a supporting function to local authority gold, so that we can pull together information from all 33 boroughs and provide it in a simple digest for that single chief executive who is representing local government at an SCG. That was its intention for large, wide-scale flooding, pandemic influenza, for example, or that kind of affecting all 33 boroughs, or where mutual aid needs to be strategised because there was a scarcity of the resource, and therefore there might be a priority to some boroughs over another.
Would the LLACC become involved where mutual aid was sought from either one neighbouring borough or fellow boroughs in a tri-borough arrangement?
So the mutual aid agreements, and there was a mutual aid guidance document provided to all of the boroughs, does set out that it's best achieved by the borough in need contacting either its neighbours or other boroughs directly themselves. They're the ones who understand the need and can describe the resource that they need directly. But what it does say is that that they should inform the LAC where that's happening, so that we have an understanding of what's being shared when in case of a further incident, or the LAC can support the administration of mutual aid under the direction of LAG when it is required across multiple boroughs.
Right. Now, you say there was a mutual aid guidance document. That's not the same, is it, as the MOU we just looked at?
No, there was a separate guidance document, so guidance for borough emergency control centres as part of a suite of LAG arrangements that we had.
Right. Forgive me, but can you remember what its title was? The mutual aid guidance document. Was it entitled Guidance for Borough Emergency Control Centres?
No, I think it would be guidance for, mutual aid guidance for under the local authority gold arrangements.
Right. Now, and is it right that the LLAC collects and disseminates information and then facilitates the collective decision-making process?
That's correct. It doesn't have a decision-making process. It provides the information for LAG upon which they can make decisions.
Now, when you say they, you mean the LLAG?
Yes.
Or the relevant individuals appointed to hold the LLAG position at any
That's
given
correct.
time?
Yeah.
Yes?
Yes,
Yeah.
as opposed to the LAC having a decision-making function itself.
Right, and just to revisit something, the LLAG, there is actually a person, isn't it? London Local Authority Gold is a person at a particular time.
That's correct. It is one of the 33 chief execs, or however many were eligible for the rota at that time.
Yeah, and is it right that there's two duty officers every 24 hours, I think? Or is it 3?
On LAG,
Yes.
we always endeavoured to have 2 chief executives on that rota. So
Yeah.
we had a LAG and a shadow LAG, and they did a 2-week period on a Wednesday to Wednesday basis.
Right, I see. And just to be clear, the arrangements underpinning the local authority gold resolution and the powers that are within it or contemplated that would be exercised by it come from the resolution, which is in turn, is this right, authorised by the regulations made under the CCA?
Yes.
Yes. Then let's turn to another.
But, I'm sorry, can I just interrupt to clarify one thing? The the gold resolution that we looked at earlier, I haven't got it on the screen at the moment, but
Let's have that up then. It is at LFB 0006166.
thank you very much. No, this is the actual resolution, and a quick look through it suggested to me that the only, as it were, a paragraph which contains something by way of active resolution was number 2. Is that right? Because 1 tells you the powers under which it's made.
Yes.
Number 2 tells you what it's doing.
Yes.
And number 3 tells you who's going to do it, or who the head of paid service is. Now, number 2, which is the effective paragraph, only deals with the council's functions under Section 1381 of the Local Government Act,
Yes.
which is to do with finance, isn't it?
That's correct. The ability to spend money
Yeah.
in an emergency. Yes.
It doesn't go any further than that.
No. So
So where do we look for the? Do we look for the memorandum of understanding for the delegation of, or the undertaking to exercise powers and provide resources?
But that's the power that a local authority has in an emergency. There are other remits. So the remit of rehousing is under the Housing Act, not the Civil Contingencies Act.
Well, I raised the question because, again, at first blush, it seemed to me that this was very limited in its scope
It is quite limited in its scope.
and doesn't say anything about providing assistance. It just allows people to spend money.
That's right. Yeah. That's the power that local authorities have in response to an emergency. Under 138, that's their power.
All right. Thank you.
And what is the source then, to the best of your understanding, of the power by the LLAG for the time being to make decisions in relation to any particular incident?
So that they have the decision, I think, to incur expenditure on behalf of that authority in order to. I think Section 138 talks about the response to an emergency where they can alleviate or kind of respond to emergencies by spending money to alleviate the suffering or remediate property, I think. I can't remember the exact wording.
But to find other, is this right? To find the other powers, where would one find the other powers of decision making vested in the chief executive for the time being in respect of a civil emergency?
In an emergency, a local authority is still discharging the duties and statutory services that it has outside of an emergency. So the power to rehouse people comes from the Housing Act. I think, is it 1974? Sorry, I think it's that Act. And likewise, its other statutory functions in relation to adult social care and everything else. It is trying to do normal services in abnormal circumstances.
Right. I just put another document in front of you which might help. LFB 000061170. This is the Chief Executive's circular dated the 26th of July 2011, which went, I think, to all Borough Chief Executives and emergency planning officers, noting the addendum to the Gold Resolution, as you can see. Was this a document which, well, you can look at it actually, it explains the substance of the changes at the foot of page 1. And in paragraph 2, it says, paragraph 1, to formalise the role of local authority gold in lower impact emerging incidents, enabling them to coordinate any local authority responses necessary. Brackets, LA Gold would not have power to either direct councils or incur any expenditure. And then 2, in exceptional circumstances, to empower local authority gold to respond to incidents and exercise delegated powers where Gold Command had not been convened. For example, in the event of extreme and disruptive weather or other events, this could only happen where detailed safeguards are complied with and where absolutely necessary. And 3, in extreme and rapidly developing situations, local authority gold may need to take immediate action. It is proposed that where this is absolutely essential, they should be able to exercise their delegated powers swiftly, including incurring minimum levels of expenditure up to a sum not exceeding £1 million in total. Now, can you help? These three changes summarised here, which are gradated, ever more extreme, are they limited to spending money, or are they indications that the local authority gold person has got wider powers?
No, I think they're limitations to the spending of money.
I see. Let's then turn to.
So I think to go back, as I understand, and this kind of predated my involvement in emergency planning, but following the Civil Contingencies Act, that the recognition of the close proximity of London boroughs to each other and the scale of incidents such as flooding, and bearing in mind that the CCA was predicated on the 4 Fs, the flooding, flu, foot and mouth, and the fuel crisis, where they could occur fairly ubiquitously across London boroughs and across boundaries. So it was a means by which to create representation of local government in a meeting of other partners, so that you didn't have 33 chief executives or wildly different strategies of local government in wide area instances. That there was an acknowledgement of kind of a single site disruptive incident that then had knock-on repercussions across a number of other boroughs. So, for example, a terrorist attack where the kind of either the understanding or kind of the perception that there would be either secondary attacks, or where a community cohesion is affected on a more wide basis. And then it was addended in 2010 as a result of the response to the snowfall, which caused quite disruptive impacts into London in 2008, 2009, where there wasn't an SCG formed. So they were acting outside of the parameters of that Gold Command, which is why it talks about the kind of without the instigation of Gold Command, which we would now take it as an SCG, so that they had the ability to direct those kind of resources of the grit and kind of low-level resources with the agreement of all 33 boroughs. But I agree with you that the limits of their power are very limited. That's a limit of democracy that we live in.
Well, it might help if I explain why I asked the question about the resolution, and that is because we've already heard in evidence how some people were of the view that once the London Gold arrangements had been activated, London Gold was able to take executive action, in other words, to give directions. And I was therefore interested, and I still am interested, in understanding, first, whether that's correct, and secondly, where does the source of the authority come from? So we may get there in due course through Mr. Millett's questions, but that was what was underlying my concern.
Yeah, and I think this is the document. It's a supporting mechanism to the local authority. The democracy, the words takeover and intervention have been used quite a lot. The only time I've ever heard them used in conjunction with the local authority gold arrangements is in relation to Grenfell Fire, and only afterwards. They were never in the vocabulary or of the lag arrangements before then. Not to my knowledge, anyway.
So can you, perhaps you can't, assist us in identifying the source of the power or authority of of John Barradell in this instance to direct RBKC's housing department, for example, to do certain things?
Invite by their chief executive, who is appointed by the leader of that council, who is democratically appointed by the residents of the Royal Borough of Kingston and Chelsea.
So was it your understanding, at least, that when LLAG was involved, the LLAG, in this case John Barradell, would essentially step into the shoes, is this right, of Nicholas Holgate and exercise his powers, but with perhaps a greater access to funding?
Let me take the last bit first. The greater access to funding, there was no greater access to funding. So there is no fund held anywhere that they can spend on. They are spending on behalf of that borough that is affected by the emergency. So it is still those resources. They had access to local government resources from across London, but as did any borough at any time under the mutual aid agreement that they could have called upon or requested the support. There was no pseudo-organisation of London Local Authority Gold that had access to any greater resources than were already available to any other borough at a time of incident that they could ask for directly themselves.
Right, but then ignoring the second part of my question and just concentrating on the first part, was it your understanding that when John Barradell got involved as the LLAG in this incident, he was stepping into the shoes of Nicholas Holgate and exercising Nicholas Holgate's powers as chief executive of RBKC?
I think that's probably a better question for John Barradell. My understanding that he was stepping into part of the shoes of Nicholas Holgate, so he wasn't taking over the entire function of the local authority, but was supporting the response to this incident in particular.
Well,
but there is a wide range of local authorities' duties that still went on in the background. That the head of paid service of that authority is still responsible for the running of.
It's a question for John Barradell as to what he understood his powers were. But my question for you is, what were the powers, or what was the source of the powers of John Barradell to exercise the authority of and make the kinds of decisions that would be made by Nicholas Holgate after the gold resolution had been invoked?
So he had the authority and the power in this to spend money in order to alleviate the suffering. I think Section 138 describes what the local authority's duties in response to an emergency are.
Well, would it, let me try it by way of a practical example. Would it have been open to Laura Johnson, who was head of making the housing decisions at RBKC in the aftermath of the fire, to say to John Barradell, I don't recognise your decisions, I'm only going to take my orders from Nicholas Holgate?
I'm sorry, I'm stumped. I don't know in that much detail. I think it would take, but in relation to the responsibility, that in terms of rehousing stems from the Housing Act, not from the Civil Contingencies Act or Section 138 of the Local Government Act. That's where the duty to rehouse people in an emergency comes from. So it is always the umbrella of the authority that is responding. It's not suddenly a transfer of duty to a civil protection team or anything else. It is each of those services still fulfilling their duties and obligations under their statutory responsibilities to deliver those services in abnormal circumstances or with increased services to meet the needs of the people who are suffering as a result of an emergency, in my opinion. And that's why it is an authority-wide response. Suddenly the responsibility doesn't flick to a contingency planning team or any other structure. It remains a responsibility of the entirety of the authority to deliver its duties. So that are there regardless of an emergency or not. The Civil Contingencies Act gives us a framework in which to plan and prepare and collaborate, but it doesn't provide a duty to respond, nor does it provide an expectation of what that response looks like. That comes from the existing legislation.
I don't know whether you can help with this question, but I think, well, you may be able to. Was there an understanding, as far as you were aware, of the position and role of of London Gold, the chief executive, who happened to be London Gold at the time? Was he understood to hold an advisory role, or was he understood to be a delegate of the local authority or the chief executive who had invoked London Gold? Was there any clear understanding of his position?
My understanding was always that it was that remit of advocacy of local government in the wide, representing the wider response, to provide a kind of overview of what local government itself could do. But the responsibilities never shift from that one borough to somebody else. That they can't, because that's a democracy that we live in. Is it?
All right. Thank you very much.
Mr. Chairman, I think that's a convenient moment for a break.
Yes, very well, thank you. Well, we take a break during the morning and the afternoon sessions, as you probably know, Mr. Hetherington. This is a good time to take the morning break. We'll stop there. We'll resume, please, at 25 to 12. And I have to ask you on this and other occasions, please don't talk to anyone about your evidence while you're out of the room. All right?
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Millett. 25 to 12, please. Thank you. Would you ask Mr. Hetherington to come back in, please? Thank you. Right, Mr. Hetherington, ready to carry on, I hope?
Yes.
Thank
Yes.
you. Yes, Mr.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, thank you. Just in light of the exchanges that we had just before the break this morning between you and me and you and the Chairman, can I go back, please, to paragraph 12 of your first statement at page 4, which we looked at together and you confirmed as correct. And you say there, in the second sentence, to deliver this, they have agreed, that's London local authorities, have agreed to pool decision-making authority and place it within a single chief executive, the London Local Authority Gold, LLAG, who will speak for local authorities as the Pan Response London is managed. Now, what decision-making authority is it that you're referring to there, which you say was placed within the single chief executive, acting as LLAG?
So it could differ in different incidents and circumstances, but we would typically expect the local authority gold to set a strategy for how local government will respond, how mutual aid may be prioritised. So to give you an example, back in the grit situation, we had to at times not supply some boroughs, but prioritise or take resources from one borough to another to even out a supply across London to make sure that everybody had a certain amount of supply to go. So they were providing a strategy within which local authorities themselves could respond in a consistent manner so that it was supportive to the emergency services. Other agencies didn't have 33 different ways of working when there was a pan-London-wide emergency affecting multiple boroughs.
The decisions would be made by the LLAG on behalf of and binding the authority in any given case, such as the authority to give some of your grit to the next door borough, in your instance. Is that right?
Sorry, I'm just pausing on the word binding. I don't know whether it's that strong in terms of direction. Or not, but I think it's a recognition of the proximity of London boroughs and the joint interests and responsibilities that they hold, that they want to act in a cohesive and coherent manner to each other rather than having multiple different response mechanisms.
Mr. Hetherington, you have used the words pool decision-making authority.
Yeah.
Now, maybe that has a meaning to a lawyer, which it doesn't have to some others, but is that what you meant?
Yes, and I suppose in the situation of a strategic coordinating group where they are representing local authorities, they do have decision-making authority to act on behalf of local government and then provide direction, I guess, back to individual boroughs. But it's I suppose they do have that decision-making authority. But the statutory responsibility would still rest with each individual local authority.
Right. Let's look at your second. Let's look at LFB 00119133. It's a document you've exhibited to your second witness statement, paragraph 104. I don't think I need to show you the statement, but here's the document. Now, this, I think, it post-dates the Grenfell Tower fire. And is entitled Guidance Note for Chief Executives Initiating Pan-London Support During Emergencies. And if you go down to the penultimate paragraph, under the heading Summary Resilience Arrangements, it says the Gold Resolution facilitates coordination of the collective local authority effort, including provision of advice, guidance and support where necessary to help shape the responses of individual authorities. It delegates formal support from the LLAG so that they can provide collective guidance and advice on behalf of London local government to deliver a coordinated response in emergency situations following the convening of gold-stroke strategic coordination groups. Now, I think, just pausing there, that reflects what you've been telling us, does it?
Yeah, I think this is probably a far better use of wording than in my statement.
Right, but we don't find a trace in that description of the idea that what is delegated to LLAG is the formal decision-making powers legally vested in the chief executive for the time being, do we?
So you're saying it's not in this?
It's not in there, no. There's no trace of that idea in there.
So, sorry, I don't understand the question.
Well, the question is, if that's an accurate description of gold resolution, then gold resolution is not the source of the power of the LLAG for the time being to make formal binding decisions on behalf of the relevant local authority, is it?
No.
No. Now, we may need to come back to that in due course when we come to look at what happened. Can we then move on in the structure to the LAPIG? Is it right that within the LAP sat the Local Authorities Panel Implementation Group, or LAPIG? Yes?
That's correct.
Yes, and I think in your first statement, we don't need to go to it, paragraph 23, you refer to it as the practitioner level group beneath the LAP.
That's correct.
Yes. Which practitioners would make up or sit on the LAPIG?
So there was a representative from each sub-regional area at practitioner level. It was normally decided amongst those areas. So that collective group of boroughs would typically appoint one of the more experienced emergency planning managers to represent them, but it was up to them, their representation of that sub-regional area.
And did at the time of the fire, did that include David Kerry?
So David Kerry sat on the LAPIG as the practitioner advisor to the chair of LAP.
Right.
So he'd held that as a long-standing position, I think, from 2007, perhaps.
I see. So to be clear, David Kerry was both the practitioner advisor on the LAP, but also the chair of the LAPIG.
No, he wasn't chair of the LAPIG. That fell to a separate chief executive.
Right. Who was that?
Forgive me, I can't remember the exact details at the time. Subsequently, I think it was Joe Negrini from Croydon. And Michael Lockwood held the position for a period of time. It will probably be in the minutes to the meeting. I'm trying to think who it was at that particular time.
Right.
Apologies.
And can you help us?
In fact, it might have been Charlie Parker at the time of the fire.
From Westminster?
That's right.
Can you explain, what does the Local Authorities Panel Implementation Group do, in a nutshell?
So they translate the LAP strategy, if you like, or the LAP direction into action. They provide the practitioner advice. They're there to provide a kind of upwards issues management raising function to the local authorities panel. They're there to ensure that practitioners who are actually going to do the work and develop the local authority-led capabilities are appointed, supported, and they act as a filter between the wider local authority emergency planning teams or contingency planning teams and the local authorities panel.
Would they be involved in any way once gold is invoked, once LLAG not?
No, it's a planning and preparation function.
Right. Then let's turn to the voluntary and faith sectors and go back, if we can please, to the diagram of the structure, LFB 000061162, please, page 7. There it is. We've looked at the LAP, and that's one of the panels on the LRF, which is now in front of us. We can see, as we've seen before, there are many others. I'm not going to ask you about all of them, but let's just look at the voluntary sector panel and the faith sector panel, which are at noon and 1 o'clock on the diagram. Is it the case that a representative of each of those panels would attend the London Resilience Forum meetings?
That's correct, yes.
And do you agree that the Category 1 responders are under a legal duty to have regard to voluntary organisations in their area?
Yes, that's correct.
Yes, and the words must have regard are set out in the regulations. What did you understand having regard to the statutory expression to mean or to entail?
So it's an understanding of their existence and to capitalise on their capability wherever possible, to understand the capabilities that they could bring to bear and support a response. So to give you an example from the voluntary sector panel, they produced as a panel a document entitled Voluntary Sector Capabilities. That was published to the forum so that there was a clear understanding of what was available to them. As a panel, they hosted periodically, there was one that took place in April of 2017, a Voluntary Sector Awareness Day, which members of the Resilience Partnership were invited to better understand. And then there was also a mechanism, certainly in the faith sector, for engagement through the BRF. So the voluntary sector panel was made up predominantly of the larger organisations, British Red Cross, St John's Ambulance, Female Auxiliary Nursing Yeomanry, etc., the large London-wide organisations. But they did have engagement in the local level and certainly with the faith sector through their own work and their own structure. They would encourage engagement through the Borough Resilience Forums.
Right, but I detect in that answer something of a distinction between the voluntary sector and the faith sector. Is it that the voluntary sector produced a London-wide capabilities document, but the faith sector produced an engagement through, or effected engagement through the BRFs?
So faith was... they provided a better network, or each borough had a faith network that we provided contact details to for the BRFs to engage with themselves. I think the faith sector also had a major incident protocol that they derived themselves, and it was led by the Archdeacon of London, I believe. So
Luke Miller.
That's right.
And we'll come to him in a minute. Just in relation to the voluntary sector for the moment, did representatives of the voluntary sector panel have input into planning for emergencies? You say they produced a capabilities document. Did they have input into the LRF's overarching resilience preparation?
Yes, so wherever possible, we'd involve all the relevant sector panels that we needed on the individual capabilities. There was also then a consultation process that would have gone through forum membership or at either the programme board level or the forum membership that enabled people interaction with each of the capabilities that were being developed.
And I think it's right that the chair of the voluntary sector panel at the time of the fire was Emma Spragg.
That's correct, yes.
And the chair of the faith sector panel at the time of the fire was Luke Miller, the Archdeacon of London.
That's correct.
Yeah. Then turning to the sub-regional resilience forums, that's just to be clear, not the same as the borough resilience forums or the BRFs.
That's correct. Yeah, they're two.
This is a broader grouping, I think. And if we look at the diagram, still on the screen, I think we can see the sub-regional resilience tier to the bottom left at 8 o'clock, yes?
Yes, that's correct.
And into that fed the Borough Resilience Forum, the BRFs.
That's correct.
Yes. Now, so let's try and be clear about this. We've discussed before that there were 6 sub-regional resilience forums, is that right?
That's correct.
And they're chaired by a chief executive of one of the London boroughs within the region making up the sub-regional forum.
That's correct.
Right. And was every London borough a member of a sub-regional resilience tier?
Yes.
Right. And the chief executive of any London borough could at any time be a chair, is this right, of the sub-regional resilience forum?
That's correct.
Right. And I think it's right that RBKC was and is a member of the central SRRF, yes?
That's correct, yes.
And the chair at the time of the fire was Eleanor Kelly of Southwark.
That's correct.
And the other local authorities within that cluster, within that SRRF, were, is this right, the City of London,
Yes.
City of Westminster, London Borough of Lambeth, Southwark, Tower Hamlets?
That's correct.
Right. Now, was Nicholas Holgate did he ever serve as the chair of that SRRF, the central SRRF?
No.
Why is that?
I don't know. Eleanor was a prominent chief executive, probably one of the most experienced in that sub-region, and took on the role.
Right. I mean, how often did the role of chair of the central SRRF get rotated?
It wasn't on a fixed periodical basis. It was if there was a volunteer chief executive who would do it, then they held that position whilst they were in office.
I see. So, how long had Eleanor Kelly been chair of the central SRRF as at June 2017?
I think from memory, from 2013 onwards.
Right. Would Nicholas Holgate, as chief executive of RBKC, have attended the SRRF meetings for the central district?
No.
Why is that?
It was at a more practitioner level. So the sub-regional tier had multi-agency representative, and then typically the emergency planning manager, contingency planning manager from each of the local authorities.
Right. So he would never have attended meetings. Is this right? And there was no system whereby the chairs of the SRRS rotated so that all 33 chief executives in London could get a shot at being a chair.
No formalised system, no.
Right. Or even an informal system, it sounds. Right. Were these SRRFs, as they were at the time of the fire, attended by other agencies, such as the emergency services or central government?
At the time, yes, they were.
They were.
Yes.
I think, is this right, David Kerry attended on behalf of RBKC?
That's correct.
That's what he says. What you say, actually. And SRRFs, I think, act, is this right, as a conduit between the Borough Resilience Forum, which you can see at about 7 o'clock on the map in front of us, on the one hand, and the LRF in the centre on the other?
That's correct.
Is it right that that's now changed? I think that SRRFs are now called sub-regional groups, SRGs.
That's correct, and it's only local authority attendance, although other agencies have the right to invite, right to attend if they so wish.
I see.
But it's a greater collaboration at a local authority level.
Right. And can you just explain briefly what the practical implications of that change are?
So previously, we had emergency services coming to the sub-regional tier. It was an information sharing mechanism. It didn't have the power to set policy because for the Metropolitan Police, the London Fire Brigade, the London Ambulance Service, they had one policy for the entirety of London. So there wasn't the ability to deviate to policy in that local area. And therefore, its greatest strength was in the collective strength for local authorities. They were the differing denominator, if you like, and the reason that they predominantly existed. All emergency, all Cat 1s should, and Cat 2s attend a borough resilience for us, so they already had that kind of local implementation at a multi-agency level, and therefore it was felt that it was more a greater efficiency of everybody's time at the sub-regional tier to focus on local authority work and kind of cooperation between them.
Let's then turn next to the Borough Resilience Forum, as you can see on the plan in front of you at about 7 o'clock. There are 33, I think, in London, weren't there? Mm-hmm. And they're a statutory body created under the Act itself, yes?
Yes, that's correct.
And made up of a single borough?
That's correct. So they were made a statutory body in the revision in 2012. So previously to 2012, the sub-regional tier had been a statutory function. That was then changed to London having a mechanism for that interrelationship between the LRF and the BRF, which became the statutory function.
Now, you say in your second statement to paragraph 7 that they meet once every 6 months, yes?
Like the LRF, they have a duty to meet at least every 6 months.
Right. Was it your understanding that the requirement to meet every 6 months, or at least every 6 months, was an internal meeting, or was it BRFs meeting each other at least every 6 months?
An internal meeting.
Right. So they were required to gather as a BRF
That's
at least
correct.
every 6
Yes.
months. I see. And who would it have been from within a borough who should be making up a borough resilience forum?
So it should be the Category 1 responder agencies represented within that borough, and also local Category 2 responders. And then there is also encouragement for engagement with the voluntary and faith sector and other agencies at that level. So the military, for example, would attend as many as they could on a rotational basis.
Right. But you say the Category 1 responder agencies represented within that borough. I mean, who would it have been in RBKC, for example, from LFB? It would be the LFB.
It would be the LFB borough commander, or potentially delegated to a station commander.
Right, thank you.
But representation of that emergency service there.
But the representation would be through somebody who had some kind of authority or at least familiarity with the borough itself.
That's correct, yes.
I see. And we've heard evidence from David Kerry that he chaired the RBKC's Borough Resilience Forum between 2013 and 2016. That was his evidence on day 268 at page 17 to 18, and it's clear from other documents. Can I show you LFB 00119191? This is your Exhibit 68. And we can see what it is. It is the LRP's Borough Resilience Forum guidance. And if you go, please, in it to page 7, you can see at the second bullet point down that it says the chair, this is in the first bubble under governance, the chair should be a person of authority that is recognised across the partnership, preferably that sits on senior strategic multi-agency groups. The chair must be a representative of any Category 1 responder and should be rotated periodically and at the very least reviewed annually to ensure buy-in from all agencies. Why was that the case? Why was it necessary to rotate the chair periodically?
So this is a guidance document that we provided. It was to encourage other agencies to be engaged in the Borough Resilience Forum. What we were finding was that it very much fell to a local authority, to secretariat and chair, and we were trying to encourage engagement from all agencies and create a shared onus of responsibility as you would at the LRF amongst Borough Resilience Forum members. So it didn't all just fall to a local authority. However, but recognising that they exist due to that kind of geography in London of the borough boundaries.
As of 2017, was this guidance that the chair of the BRF should be rotated periodically one which was complied with, or was it generally not complied with?
Different borough resilience forums tackled it in different ways. So I know that there were borough resilience forums who alternated their chair between different emergency services and always provided a local authority secretariat. But we didn't. We had a monitoring process, a fairly passive monitoring process that we invited each BRF to provide a report of its membership and who chairs, etc., on an annual basis to the SRF. But it was for their application of this guidance to put it into place.
Right. When you say that last answer, us, was that the LRG?
Yes, sorry, yes. Yeah.
Did the LRG have any power to at least suggest to or even compel a Category 1 responder, well, a local authority rather, to rotate its chair of its BRF in accordance with this guidance?
No.
Did a review of David Kerry's position ever take place, do you know?
No.
No.
Not by London Resilience Group.
Right. Was it unusual for only one individual to occupy the chair of a BRF for 3 years?
No, it wasn't unusual.
Right. So in your experience, was it often the case? It sounds as if it was, that these roles... Well, let me try this differently. David Kerry, I think, had a number of significant roles within the LRF, didn't he?
That's correct.
I mean, he sat on the BRF. He was a member of the LAPIG. Would you agree that it was often the case that these roles would be performed by the same person within a borough resilience forum?
That's correct, yes.
Yeah. And in respect of RBKC, was there a danger of over-reliance on one individual as opposed to a spread within RBKC of people who had accumulated knowledge and contributed to the London resilience landscape, perhaps from different perspectives?
Absolutely. I would say not just in RBKC, but across the whole partnership.
So this concentration of knowledge and expertise was endemic, would you say?
Yes.
Yeah. Now, it's right to think that, according to the Act, the Borough Resilience Forum has a duty to assess risk and publish a borough risk register, yes?
That's correct.
And that's a fundamental activity, isn't it?
That's correct, yes.
Yes. Let's go to LFB 001191. I'm sorry. It's this document, actually, page... if we can go to page 9 in it. We'll look at it later, I think, in a bit more detail. I have other questions for you about it, but on page 9, you can see there is business planning. You see that there. And if you go down the page, please, to page 10, you can see risk assessment process at paragraph 2.4. And then at page 11, you've got paragraph 2.5, regional planning cycle, rolling 3-year cycle. And then on page 12, local capability development. Yes? That's
correct, yes.
These are some of the roles for the BRF. Have those roles changed since the Grenfell Tower fire, do you know?
No, they won't have changed. This guidance was to try and distill, as you've seen through evidence, there's a huge raft of guidance that comes out from different places. We were just trying to distill into a fairly manageable document, a single source for all agencies, just to kind of guide them through what their responsibilities were, provide examples of good practice, potentially, I think perhaps in an earlier version of the BRF guidance, and generally just help them to achieve the duties and responsibilities they had at a BRF level.
Right. So am I right? This document is a document you would expect, is this right, a chief executive to be familiar with?
Not necessarily the chief executive. I would expect the members of the Borough Resilience Forum to be familiar with, and it's a kind of impact that the Borough Resilience Forum were often managed at the contingency planning unit level, right, as opposed to a wider, more senior approach.
So this is, would it be right to describe this document as a handbook to the guides?
Yes.
Yeah, a guide to guides.
Yeah, that's good.
Right. Well, we will likely come back to it in due course. Can I then turn, please, can we get back to the diagram? I want now to turn to the London Resilience Programme Board, another element in the architecture for London Resilience. And if you look at the plan in front of us there, we can see feeding into the London Resilience Forum at about 5 o'clock on the plan is the London Resilience Programme Board. And underneath that, feeding into that, is underpinning capabilities and risk-based capabilities. Yes?
Yes, that's correct.
Now, capability, what is that? Let's go to LFB 000061189. You can see that I'm answering the question I posed, but is this right? Well, let me show you. This is the first page of a document entitled London Resilience Partnership Framework Review Process. And if you look at the terminology, associated terminology under paragraph 2, capability is defined there as a demonstrable ability to respond to and recover from a particular threat of hazard, UK civil protection lexicon definition. A capability will typically incorporate doctrine, plans, documents, resources and logistics, training, exercising and interoperability. There are criteria by which London capabilities are assessed. Now, first then, can you explain what underpinning capabilities means in the diagram we've just been looking at?
So the underpinning capabilities were those generic capabilities such as strategic coordination, the communications protocol, the recovery protocol, or the London Emergency Services Liaison Panel major incident protocols, which would be used in pretty much all incidents as the kind of overarching structure to which we would respond.
Right. Those are guidance documents, are they?
They're the response frameworks by which we underpin the capability. That's the plans, documents, and kind of doctrine element of the capability.
Right, but would I be right in thinking that as part of that, you referred to the LELSLP Major Incidents Protocol, that in turn would carry definitions of what a local authority would be expected to do. For example, rest centres, or the Friends and Relatives Reception Centre.
Yes, so the framework would be a document that would outline the roles and responsibilities, the way in which we would expect to operate in response to an emergency. So the underpinning ones are generic to almost any incident, and then the risk-specific would be, for example, the mass fatalities framework, the flooding framework, a pandemic influenza framework that gives you specific guidance in relation to that specific task that you're carrying out or response.
Right, so, but I'd be right in thinking that the contents of the framework documents, which created the framework for the capabilities, would themselves include things to be done by local authorities.
That's correct.
And therefore overseen by the LAP and the LAPIG.
That's correct, yes.
Yes, but also to be overseen by the sub-regional resilience tier and the borough resilience fora. In other words, intra-district and intra-borough.
Yes, so the Pan-London capability documents provided the framework within which we all expected the various agencies to respond, so that we had an understanding of what the roles and responsibilities were in relation to each other.
I follow. Going back to if we can go back to the plan then, please, that we had a moment ago. There it is. You've got underpinning capabilities pointing into London Resilience Programme Board, but is it right in fact to say that the underpinning capabilities actually wrap around the whole structure?
Absolutely, yes.
Right, I understand. Now, so far as risk-based capabilities are concerned, what does that mean, and what are they?
So they were the other suite of frameworks or specific capabilities for a specific risk or the outcome of a risk. So we had mass fatalities, as I've said, flooding, CBRN. There's a list of about 20 or so differing capabilities. The humanitarian assistance capability, the evacuation shelter, all of those specific elements that would then be used in conjunction to one another underneath the kind of overarching or underpinning capabilities that would provide the kind of framework within which we respond.
I see. I follow. So now then, going to your second statement, please, page 26, paragraph 83. You say there, the process of capability development and the development of training exercises is overseen by the London Resilience Programme Board, for which LRG provides the secretariat. The purpose of LRPB overall is to ensure that the LRP works together towards the implementation of the LRP delivery plan, and it plays a number of roles in that regard, including developing the LRP partnership strategy, allocating work to agencies, sector panels, and capability development groups, and overseeing work such as the process of identifying lessons and implementing them through the use of training and exercises. Would it be fair to say, in summary, that the LRPB, simplifying it perhaps, oversees three things, perhaps? First, risk, through the London Risk Advisory Group, which drafts the London Risk Register. Yes?
Yes, that's good.
Second, lessons learned through the partnership lessons process. Yes?
Yes, that's great.
And then third, training and exercising. Yes?
Yes, there are three distinct groups that sit under the programme board, yes.
Yes. Is there anything else, anything I've missed in identifying that trinity of capabilities?
No, they act as the kind of the consistent information to be used by any of the capability development groups, working groups, in order to inform them of what they need to be cognizant of and kind of be building in terms of their response.
Right. Now let's go, please, to LFB 00119205. This is your exhibit 69. And this is the London Resilience Partnership Strategy document. And if we go in it, please, well, you can see from the bottom that it was version 2 approved by LRF in October 2016. If you go, please, to page 8, you can see that it's made up of a number of representative agencies. If you go to the foot of the page, you can see structures for developing capabilities. Mm-hmm. And it says that the LRPB implements the partnership strategy through the London Resilience Programme. Its membership includes representatives of agencies, sector panels and capability development groups. The chair of LRPB is a member of the LRF. Now, just help me with that. The chairmanship of the LRF is the chairmanship of the LRPB, the membership of the LRF is the groups we've seen, so different panels.
So LRPB was at the time chaired by Steve Ham as the head of programme. It's now chaired by myself as the head of London Resilience Group.
Right, but just help me. The chair of LRPB, it says here, is a member of the LRF. Presumably the chair is an individual, yes?
Yes.
Yes. So looking at the LRF structure, where would the individual come from? You don't have individual members of the LRF, do you?
Well, there are named members of the LRF,
but they're panels or boards. They're not individuals. Yes. So who would be? From where would the individual person occupying the chair of the LRPB be drawn?
From the London Resilience Group.
From the London Resilience Group.
Yes. So it was Steve Ham whilst he was in the post, and then I took over the chair of LRPB once he left.
Right, but it says LRF, not LRG. Is that wrong?
That could either be a typo or a kind of recognition that the LRPB is itself reporting into the LRF as well.
Right, I think I see. Now, if we go to the London Resilience Forum Terms of Reference, we'll find that at LFB 000061162. Page 3. This is paragraph 8, and we've got the diagram again. And it says in the second paragraph under operating model, in order to achieve its objectives, the London Resilience Forum will be supported by an officer-level programme management board to be known as the London Resilience Programme Board, the sub-regional resilience tier, and sector panels. And if you go then to the rest, and you can see the structure of the rest of it. Who else would sit on the board at the LRPB?
So the programme board is made up of the agencies at a more operational level. So it'd be a tier below the chief officer level expectation at the LRF.
Right. And then if you look at the third bullet point down, under London Resilience Programme Board will, it says, be chaired by the head of the London Resilience Group. And that, I think, makes what you were saying earlier clear.
Yes.
That it's LRG, not LRF. And that, I think, was Steve Ham at the time of the fire, as you've confirmed.
Yes.
According to the... let's go back to the document we were on before. LFB 0011205, which is the strategy document we were looking at. If we go in that, please, to page 8 again, according to that, we've seen it says LRF. My question is, looking at both of these, did you or any of the other deputy heads of London Resilience have any role on the LRPB?
Yes. Yes, so we would feed in
You would feed in.
that work, yes.
And did you or any of the other deputy heads of London Resilience have any role on the London Resilience Forum other than through the LRG?
Not other than through our role as the secretariat to the forum and the work that we did in support of the work of the forum and its strategy.
And if we go in this same document, please, to page 9, this is the LRP strategy document. At the top of page 9, there's a reference to a senior responsible owner. The LRF appoints a senior responsible owner who is a member of the LRF to coordinate the development of capabilities for identified risks. Their role is to ensure the timely delivery of the work. Now, you refer to, in your second statement, to paragraph 82, I don't think we need to go to it, to a senior responsible owner, or SRO, in respect of each capability. Is that the same? Or is that the SRO or senior responsible owner referred to in this document?
Yes, that's the same.
That is that, right. Then let's turn to the capability groups and risk-based capability in more detail. If we go back to the diagram, please, at LFB 00123769, page 3. It's a slightly different diagram, in fact. If we look at that, can we have that expanded? This diagram sits within a document which starts on page 1, which I should show you first, if I can, because it might help people trying to keep up with what we've been doing this morning. But London Resilience, which is the first item is London Resilience, the brand stroke all-encompassing term, London Resilience Forum, the executive oversight body, London Resilience Partnership, a shared responsibility to continually develop London resilience, then London Resilience Group, and it has 6 bullet points, and it says supports the partnership in preparedness and response, jointly funded and governed by GLA, LLA and the London Fire Commissioner, hosted by the London Fire Brigade, programmes of work, 20-person team, 24/7 response capability, team of 9 people, including LFB volunteers. And then underneath it, almost perhaps tongue-in-cheek, LR, LRG, LRT, LRF, LRP. Ministers tend to refer to LRFs of late, but LRFs are collaborative bodies and do not have power of direction. I show you that really as a conduit to showing everybody else the system, perhaps in simple terms. But look at the diagram now, page 3. Just explaining it, we've got the LRF, Set Strategy and Work Programme, and then underneath that, the LRPB coordinates work. Then there are the sector panels, which we are familiar with now. And then you've got, on the left-hand side, the subgroups, risk assessment, learning and implementation, training and exercising, and capability groups, develop and maintain partnership capabilities. Now, I think those are new, aren't they? Those are subgroups we haven't, or capability groups we haven't looked at before, or are they?
They're the capability groups to develop each of the partnership frameworks or capabilities.
Right.
This is a newer way in which we depict the structure of the forum from the purple blob-shaped diagram that you referred to earlier.
Yes, I see. So they sit underneath, or rather they sit within the bubbles that say underpinning capabilities and
That's
risk-based
right, yeah.
capability. I follow. Who sits on those groups?
So that will be practitioners, emergency planners from all the respective agencies that need to feed into that capability.
And if you look at capability groups, as I read to you a moment ago, develop and maintain partnerships.
Sorry, I thought you were referring to capability groups. Then.
Right.
Sorry, who sits on?
On the subgroups.
So again, that's Category 1 responders. So the risk assessment has membership from all Category 1 and 2 responders, and a representative from local authorities from each of the sub-regional areas to provide the local kind of input. The learning and implementation group again has representatives from all the Category 1 and 2 responders, possibly less the Category 2 responders, that they may attend less frequently, and then the training and exercising group again is a multi-agency group of Category 1 and 2 responders.
Now let's, focusing on capability groups then, go back to the LRP guide, the LRP strategy document. That's LFB 00119205. And if we go to page 14 in this document now, we can see a summary of partnership capabilities as at 2016, and underneath them you've got evacuation, shelter, flooding, etc. You can see that. What do these capabilities mean in practice?
So each of those capabilities is a framework. This is the kind of the underpinning and risk-based capabilities that we were talking to earlier. So the horizontal lines are those that we may use in relation to any incident and quite widely used, and then each of the individual is a risk-based response. So the flooding framework, for example, will give you the kind of greater granularity and details and roles and responsibilities in respect to that specific capability. Likewise, the mass fatalities may have a different membership because it's more focused around the DVI process. And so the specifics of how we manage disaster mortuaries in response to an incident. So we may well have incidents that don't use all of those specific capabilities, but they're almost a plug and play set of functions that we can invoke any one of them at the time that we need to, and that creates the structure of subgroups underneath the strategic coordinating response.
So does each of these dark blue columns represent topics in respect of which there is a document comprising a framework or protocol?
That's right, yeah. With an SRO appointed from that lead agency.
Who would sit on the programme board?
Or the LRF. The SRO typically was the LRF member, so that it had that highest level of ownership, and they would then determine who it is going to deliver that exact framework. So to give you an example, local authorities were the SRO for structural collapse is one, animal diseases is another, disruption to fuel, mass shelter, excess deaths, certainly. So that's a number of capabilities. That John Barradell, as the chair of LAP, would be the SRO for each of those in the eyes of the LRF, but through the work of LAP, that can discharge that work through LAPIG to formulate a group and an individual to develop and lead that exact capability.
What tells me which SRO is responsible for which blue column?
Not this document, but the overarching work programme for the partnership would. The London Resilience Partnership Work Programme would.
What's that?
So
is that another?
That would be another document, yes.
All right. Who generated that?
So we generate that as part of the. So London Resilience Group, rather than we generate that as part of our Secretariat Business Administration support to the LRF, and that will change periodically.
Right, and just to help me, the capabilities here, are these risk-based capabilities or underpinning capabilities?
So this document here shows both. So the vertical lines are the risk-based capabilities. They're individual or kind of caused by specific risks. The supporting capabilities or the underpin the response to anything. So that the coordination and situation awareness we now term as the strategic coordinating protocol. The recovery is the recovery coordinating protocol that you might use in response to any incident.
So see if I can summarise this, if I got this right. There is a London risk register which identifies risks which are then set out in the blue columns here. Yes?
So the London Risk Register will set out a series of risks. Derived from that risks are a number of capabilities that we have to respond to those risks. So there may be multiple risks that would cause mass fatalities, for instance, but therefore we need the generic capability to respond to mass fatalities. So we distill the overarching risk register into what capabilities we need to respond to, and therefore have a programme of capabilities to respond to meet those risks deemed necessary.
And whose responsibility is it to compile and maintain the London Risk Register as the community risk register?
So the London Resilience Group provide the administration support, and we provide the chair to the London Risk Advisory Group and present that to the forum.
Well, I think we come to that shortly, but just perhaps leaving that on one side, is this the way that it works? That the LRG generates this document, which is the risk-based capabilities, by reference to a number of, by reference to framework documents corresponding to each of the blue columns, yes? And then there's an SRO for each of those to be identified in a separate document, yes?
Yes.
And then the London Resilience Programme Board provides assessment and training in respect of that.
No. So the SRO and the lead responsible agency provide the framework and also the training needs analysis and the training in respect to each of those capabilities. So as the document earlier said, a capability is made up of not just a framework but also resources, training, exercising, doctrine, etc. The SRO is that lead agency, and that's the principle that is adhered through I imagine most LRFs, but that kind of stems through right the way from risk assessment all the way through in terms of it is logical that the pandemic influenza is risk assessed by the National Health Service as the agency closest to it. They then are the SRO for the development of the capability, outlining in conjunction with all the other responders the collective roles and responsibilities, so people understand their part in that plan, and then also devising or the training needs analysis and the joint training element or assurance through exercising element. But each agency then still has the responsibility to understand their part in these documents and train and ensure that they have the ability to deliver their roles and responsibilities.
Right. So just to see if I can look at it from a different viewpoint. I'm David Kerry and I'm sitting in RBKC. Mm-hmm. I'm looking at this document. What do I have to be familiar with?
You will have to be familiar with all of the elements within them that portray to a local authority role or responsibility.
And in order to know what that is, what do I look at? I look at the document which tells me.
Yeah.
But that's a separate document not identified here. It's a separate document.
So each of these will be a separate document.
Yeah, but the document which tells me which I need to know, whether I need to know about flooding but don't need to know about animal disease, is a separate document, which I would also need to be familiar with. Yes?
It would be each of these documents that outlines the roles and responsibilities, yes.
Yes, but I think you said earlier that the SRO would be the person responsible, and that wouldn't necessarily always be the...
So the SRO is responsible for the production of the framework and the ownership and the administration as that lead agency.
Yes.
So the LRF has a duty to maintain the risk register and a systematic approach to multi-agency aspects of its work. And this is that systematic approach of how we can define what capabilities and frameworks are required, who is responsible for delivering them, and a programme of work over a 3-year rolling programme. So in any 1 year, a third of these frameworks would be expected to be revised and then published through the LRF system.
And is it the case that in respect of each of these blue columns, all of the 5 lilac-coloured columns would be engaged? In case there was a structural collapse, then the person in the BRF responsible for contingency planning would need to know what to do under each of these 5 lilac bands.
Yes, not necessarily all of them would be invoked, but they are. Then they're not specific to any one particular risk or cause.
And by that you mean you could have humanitarian assistance because of structural collapse, a mass evacuation, but not need to have a local authority goal resolution.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I see that. Now, we've looked at quite a lot this morning, but before we move on to the next topic, risk assessment, which I think flows from the capabilities that I've been asking you about, we've already touched on, and just reflect for a moment on the structure of London Resilience. Would you agree that the structures and arrangements were of labyrinthine complexity?
I'd agree that they are complicated, yes.
I think
those practitioners in it understand it, but I completely appreciate that to the layperson it is a complicated structure.
And do you consider that each body has a clearly defined role and set of responsibilities?
So I think we have documents that lays out each constituent's parts, roles and responsibilities that are there and written. I think alongside that there is a plethora of guidance that for people to get their head around, which doesn't make it clear.
Was it your experience, practical experience, as at June 2017, that bodies and relevant individuals clearly understood their roles and the scope of their responsibilities within this architecture?
Yes, I think bodies did understand their roles because they lived and breathed it, and through all the structures that we had, there was also, so for the sub-regional tier, for example, associated to the formal business meeting in the afternoon was a workshop session in the morning, which would take through and improve the understanding of any one of these capabilities. So on a cyclical basis, over a period of years, we would approach a number of these topics so that there was local familiarity with the topic and the understanding of the roles and responsibilities laid out within them.
Did any of the prior experiences, so far as there were any, involving a London resilience response, prompt any reflection on whether this network of structures of what some might regard as Byzantine intricacy was necessarily conducive to giving full effect to the CCA?
So we were constantly, as you could see through the two diagrams, I think the green coloured diagram that you brought up at the end with the square boxes which laid out the structure of the forum is a lot easier to understand than the previous purple blob. So we're continually looking to refine our processes. The roles of a local resilience forum are actually quite discrete. They're laid out in the guidance through the role of a resilience forum to compile the risk register, to have a systematic programme of work in regard to the duties, which is this systematic programme here, and to support a coordinated programme of training and exercising for partners in those multi-agency elements. The difficulty comes in the additional expectations that are placed upon a local resilience forum, which are ill-defined or hidden through a raft of guidance that then further confuse.
Right. Let's continue then. I want next to look at plans, policies and procedures, and first with looking at risk assessment. Now, in your second witness statement, paragraph 43, page 14, we can just go to that. You provide us with an overview of the London Resilience Risk Assessment process and a group known as the London Risk Advisory Group, or LRAG.
That's right.
And you say that their role is to produce and update the London Risk Register, LRR, following the conduct of risk assessments and the collation of relevant data. The LRAG, if you don't mind me using that, itself is a group which consists of members from a number of responders, for example, police, utilities, local authorities, etc., which will each own the risks within their remit. The lead agency for a given risk will be primarily responsible for reviewing it. Are we right to understand that this group, the LRAG, is made up of Category 1 and Category 2 responders?
That's correct.
Right. Did it include any other organisations, such as the DCLG?
Yes, DCLG are present and members of that group.
They are. And what is the relationship between LRAG and the statutory responsibility of Category 1 responders? How does LRAG help?
So LRAG is part of that LRF role to jointly compile a community risk register. So this is the group that will review the risks on a periodic basis over a 2-year rolling policy. So all of the risks derived from the National Risk Register and the local risk assessment guidance provided by the Cabinet Office. So they will review those scores, apply kind of the London context, and then produce the London Risk Register as a result. And
you mentioned utilities there. They are Category 2 responders, aren't they?
They are, yes.
And that's how they feed into LRAG. Now you go on to say, as I've shown you, that they will own the risks within their remit. And there's a lead agency for a given risk, which is primarily responsible for owning it.
Is that different from capabilities that we saw?
Yes, so the process is risk assessment, planning assumption, or contextualisation, risk assessment, planning assumption, and then all of that information derives what capabilities you therefore need. So the outcomes of all the risks derive what capabilities we need to be able to respond as a collective, as the resilience partnership to any one risk.
I see. So just help me, is the capabilities document, the one with the blue columns and the lilac bands, the product of the work of LRAG?
Not directly. It's the product of the work of the forum. LRAG is one of those feeding pieces of information which informs it.
Right, I see. Then let's look at the risk register. You describe LRAG as a working group. But let's go to paragraph 45, where you say what I'm putting to you. Please, page 15. You say the development of the LRR involves a collective approach to risk management with all relevant agencies, including representatives from local authorities within the 6 sub-regional resilience areas, being able to recommend risks for consideration and also to play a role in scoring the risks which are deemed applicable to London. This process is coordinated by the LRAG, which is a working group for which LRG provides the secretariat. Now, just to be clear, is it right that the London Risk Register, the LRR, is developed in line with the National Risk Register?
That's correct.
And that's produced by the Cabinet Office?
That's correct.
It's Civil Contingencies Secretariat, I think, yes?
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah. And that's essentially, is it, a list of risks identifiable, which then provides a springboard for planning?
That's correct.
Right. Now, let's dive into that then. LFB 000061165. And what I'm showing you here is, yes, the London Risk Register as at February 2017. This is version 5.4, as you can see from the bottom left-hand corner of your screen. And it carries the badge of the London Resilience Partnership. Now, just to recap, before I ask my question, the London Resilience Programme Board, is this right? And tell me if any of this is wrong. The London Resilience Programme Board oversees the work of the London Resilience Advisory Group, LRAG, and which is responsible for producing and updating the London Risk Register.
That's correct.
Right. And the London Resilience Programme Board, if we go to, well, we've seen it in the diagram. It's probably easier just to ask you. The London Resilience Programme Board feeds into the London Resilience Forum. So is that why the London Risk Register is produced under the London Resilience Partnership banner?
Yes, all of our documents took a similar look and feel to them under the auspices of the London Resilience Partnership.
Right. So is it right? There's no real significance in it saying London Resilience Partnership as opposed to London Resilience Forum.
No.
Right. Now, if we go back to your second witness statement, please, which we were looking at a moment ago, and stick with page 15, look at paragraph 47, if we can have that in full on your screen. It says, the LRR does not constitute an exhaustive list of every individual and specific incident which could possibly occur. It would simply not be possible to list each and every potential risk. Instead, the LRR offers an overview of the principal risks which may affect London as a whole, and which is based on the work of the LRAG in analysing historical and scientific data, considering the national guidance and determining whether a particular risk ought to be included. Now, going back, if we can, to the London Risk Register we were just looking at, please, LFB 000061165. Can I ask you to go to page 13 in that document and go to the top of it? It says severe space weather, and that's defined, disruption to 2 coastal electrical substations, and you've got red, identified as very high risk, and then underneath that, severe wildfires, forest or moorland fire, London Fire Brigade, forest or moorland fire across up to 1,500 hectares over a period of 7 to 10 days, evacuation of between 100 and 3,000 homes, up to 10 fatalities and 100 casualties. And the risk is level low, green. Now, we've looked through this document. That's the closest thing to a fire risk we've been able to find. Is it right that a high-rise or urban tower block fire is not listed?
That's correct.
Right. Do you know why that was?
So it wasn't contained as a risk in the National Risk Register or the local risk assessment guidance that was provided to us as an applicable risk, nor was it raised by any one of the agencies as a member of LRAG as a risk that they considered requiring
Right.
a London-wide approach.
Now, at this point, which is February 2017, can you help us? Were you aware yourself that there had been at least 2 major fires in tower blocks in London since 2009? I mean, one can name many more than this, but there was Lakenhall in July 2009 and Adair Tower in October 2015. Do you know whether any consideration was given to tower block fires in light of those experiences when revising this document in February 2017?
Not specifically at that time, no. It wasn't brought to the attention of the group that there was a requirement in response to either of those fires.
Now, if we go to page 23, and we'll come back to that question shortly, but if we come or go to page 23 in the document, second row from the bottom, this has building collapse in it. You see that? HL 22. Sorry, HL 105. Complex built environments. There are two entries there. HL 105. Complex built environments. A consequence of a major incident affecting large buildings, complex built environments. Incidents in these facilities have the potential to trigger a complex chain of events that lead to serious consequences for public. And you can see the statutes on the right-hand side. Health and Safety at Work Act and the regulations, Fire and Rescue Services Act 2004 and guidance pursuant to the RRO. And then 2 down from that, local building safety systems and practices. You see that. Now, you've graded that as yellow, as medium. Now, behind that entry, if we go, please, to your second statement, we can see how you describe this. If you go, please, to paragraph 48, you say, prior to the Grenfell Tower fire, there was no specific entry on the NRR or LRR for urban or tower block fires. There is a general risk which would be applicable to such a situation headed HL 105 complex built environments. This relates to specific issues associated with a major incident affecting large buildings or complex built environments, etc. And you're quoting there essentially from what I've just read to you. There is deemed to be a medium risk of such an event occurring in London. Now, if you then go to what lies behind that, you've provided some more detail. If you go, please, to LFB, LFB 00119132. This is, well, just help me, what is this document?
So this is the individual risk assessment. So every line that you see in the overarching risk register has a wealth of detail behind it, as you can see here with the hazard outcome description, subcategories, and historical information relating to it and the times at which it was reviewed.
So to be clear for everybody, this is the underlying granular risk data comprising the assessment, which we see at HL 105.
That's correct.
Right. Then if we go, please, to page 2, you can see fire as one of the risks. And then if you go to page 3, you can see his key historical evidence, which runs in reverse chronological order from January 1971, a fire in Glasgow, when the barriers at Ibrox collapsed, to 10th of February 2006, when there was a riot, so it appears, at the midnight opening of a new IKEA furniture superstore in Edmonton. There's no reference there to any major London fire, is there?
No, and it's probably the closest applicable risk rather than being a directly applicable risk. I think that the complex urban environment was supposed to be related to a public space as opposed to any residential dwelling.
Yes, right. But if you go back to page 2, you can see what the complex built environment includes. At the very top of the screen, sports stadia, city or town centre complexes, large educational establishments, etc., etc. Nothing there about dense housing or residential tower blocks, is there?
No.
No. Why is that?
Because the guidance given to us at the time, either through the National Risk Register and its associated local risk assessment guidance, or anything provided by any of the individual agencies considering risks pertinent to them that they need to draw to the attention of multi-agency partners, never brought that around. There was a sense of the building regulation standards that we've heard already in evidence being sufficient to ward against or mitigate against fires of that nature.
Is that right? So,
No.
just on that answer, is it right that the London Resilience Group's view, those compiling this risk register, was that the building regulations were sufficiently robust that an emergency within the Civil Contingencies Act would not need to be contemplated where it arose from a tower block fire? It was simply not necessary to consider it.
So not necessarily London Resilience Group's view. We're not the only ones who contribute to this, but there was no guidance or direction given to us as the Secretariat and managers of the local risk advisory group to produce the London Risk Register of that type of risk occurring.
But London's a built-up area, yes?
Yes.
And it has a high concentration of high-rise buildings and tower blocks, yes?
Yes.
And many of those high-rise buildings are residential, aren't they?
Yes.
Yes. And a fire occurring in such a building was always going to pose, surely, a risk of some kind, yes?
Yes.
And the chance of an urban fire or a tower block fire, it was much more likely in London than, for example, a wildfire, no?
Yes.
Yes. So how can you account for the fact that a tower block fire, given everything you've just accepted, was omitted from this document?
Because, again, it was never raised by any of the individual agencies who appreciated it as a risk factor that they could generate into this collective risk register at any stage. It was never raised by somebody to bring it to the attention of a collective, nor was it contained within the risk assessment guidance given by central government. It now has been. That's been reflected in the 2019 version.
Standing right back, I think you would agree that the CCA 2004 regulations say that the duty to assess the risk of an emergency occurring by a Category 1 responder, or on the part of a Category 1 responder, was in relation to an emergency which affects or may affect the area in which the functions of the general Category 1 responder are exercisable. Yes?
Yes.
Yes. And therefore, do you accept, or is that it must have been the case that after the Lacknell House fire in Southwark in 2009, Southwark, as a Category 1 responder, should have been feeding that risk into this process if the architecture was to run as planned?
Yes.
And similarly, RBKC after the Adair fire in October 2015, yes?
Yes.
Has any thought ever been given to why that didn't happen?
No.
I mean, was it known to chief executives of local authorities, such as those in the position of Nicholas Holgate, that they had to consider things like tower block fires in their area and feed them into the risk assessment as and when it was updated?
So I don't know if it was known to them. As you've laid out, there was a duty on the Category 1 responders to assess the risks that are applicable to them and to raise them, so that we have a coordinated risk register for the entirety of London. I don't know whether they knew that themselves in person.
Right. And now, high-rise residential blocks are not limited to RBKC or Southwark, of course, are they? They are fairly widespread across London, some more densely than others in certain boroughs. But is it, to your knowledge, was it the case that at no stage any of these 33 London boroughs, being Category 1 responders, fed the risk of a tower block fire into the London Local Resilience Risk Assessment?
I can't recall a time when that was ever raised to us, no.
Right.
Or raised to the group, sorry.
Now, this document, I think, was updated in June 2019, wasn't it?
Yes.
Yes, let's look at that.
So which document do you mean? The London Risk Register?
You're quite right. Let me put the document to you. Can we go to LFB 00119132? Now, this is version 2.3. If you go, please, to I'm sorry, I need another document, actually. I think we need LFB 00119135. We can compare the key historical evidence that I've just shown you running to February 2006 with what's coming up next. And this is a spreadsheet. LFB 00119135. This is your Exhibit 35, Mr. Hetherington, so it ought to be familiar to you. Yes, thank you. If we can have that expanded. Now, you can see that, and this document was updated in June 2019, and you can see that if you go to, if you scroll down, scroll back up again to you can keep the key historical evidence and relevant information there on the screen. About 2/3 of the way down the block of text, you can see that there are two fires overseas. You've got the 25th of March 2018 Kemerovo Shopping Centre fire, Russia. Fire engulfed the upper floors of the Winter Cherry shopping mall, an entertainment complex, killing at least 64 people, 41 of which were children. And then an incident 2 years before that, 18 months before that, in Pakistan, the Khalid Plaza shopping mall fire in December 2014, 13 killed when short-circuited as a shop sparked a fire in a 3-storey shopping centre. But no reference to the Grenfell Tower fire when this was reviewed and updated in June 2019.
No, so I think by June 2019 we were aware of revisions to the National Risk Register and the associated local risk assessment guidance, which was due to include a major urban fire incorporating a tower block fire. And as we saw earlier, that the outcome descriptor to this was a public building as opposed to a residential building. So I think it's probably an administrative function to keep those two risks separate in the knowledge that a new risk was coming in to provide better descriptor to a urban tower block fire.
Right. So are you saying that risk HL105, which is what this information went to, was public buildings, and a new risk was coming in for tower blocks?
That's right.
Which is why there was no reference to the Grenfell Tower fire here.
That's right.
I see. Now, the London Borough of Hammersmith and Fulham modelled a training exercise, other witnesses have referred to, called Exercise Babel, on the risk of a tower block fire. And that exercise took place on the 6th of November 2015, only a week or so after the Adair Tower fire in RBKC. Were you aware of that exercise at the time?
No, I wasn't.
You were Deputy Head of Emergency Planning at LFB. Were you not told about that exercise or exercises like it?
Not personally, I can't remember that exercise.
Did you keep tabs on what training was being done by individual local authorities?
Not specifically to any granular detail. What we did provide is through the sub-regional resilience forum a members update. So each borough resilience forum had the ability to share information about its current work programme, training and exercising and recent incidents, so that they were able to share experience with other members of that sub-regional resilience forum. So we would publish that. So we would that was a form that we would circulate to them before the meeting, 3-4 weeks before the meeting. They would fill it in, we would compile it, and then it would be part of the discussion and the information sharing practice. I've looked back over records, and the Adair fire was not raised at a sub-regional resilience forum in order to share information with other parts.
Should it have been?
Yes.
Yes. Do you accept that the risk of a high-rise or urban tower block fire should have been included as a separate entry on the London Risk Register before June 2017?
Completely now known the information that we have, yeah.
And that the absence of it was a serious failing?
Yes, in hindsight, a serious failing. That the kind of information that we were given at the time through tentative probing was that always that, and I think you heard this through evidence that was read in to Peter Holland when he asked about a serious fire in another country. Would that ever happen in the UK? And he was told that no, because of the strong building regulations that we have in place, that wouldn't happen in the UK. And that was always the kind of mentality that was held. Erroneously now, looking back, absolutely.
Now, Peter Holland was the Chief Fire and Rescue Advisor to the CFRA from 2013. Did you, in your role, have dealings with him?
No, I'm just aware of that comment through having seen previous evidence.
Right, I see. So, but are you telling us that the LRG in general, perhaps, but you in particular, were of the view that it was not necessary to include a tower block fire or a cladding fire in particular as a risk, because you coincidentally perhaps shared the same view as Peter Holland, or the same view as others perhaps within the DCLG, that it couldn't happen here?
I think we were afforded the same interpretation by other experts of it, and nor was it raised to us as. So we as LRG are not solely responsible. That's the point of the coalition of the London Resilience Forum, that partners work collaboratively together to jointly assess the risk, and that's why all of the Category 1 responders feed into this. It is not solely our view or anything else. We provide the administrative support and direction behind it.
Did anybody from the DCLG ever give you or your colleagues on the LRG any reason to think that a major tower block fire as a result of the presence of combustible material in the cladding structure was not a risk you needed to consider?
Sorry, I just which. Is there a double negative? I'm sorry.
Yes.
Did they ever give us indication that it was a risk? No, I don't ever remember. Did they?
No, it
explicitly say that it wasn't. No, again, either. I don't think it was ever formally raised in any shape or form. There were probably informal discussions around it, but there was always that belief of the building regulations in the UK would ward against it.
But my question was an express one. Did anybody from the DCLG ever give you or your colleagues on the LRG any reason to think that a major tower block fire, as a result of the presence of combustible materials in the cladding structure, did not present a risk that you needed to consider for the purposes of the LRR?
No.
No. Right. Mr. Chairman, I've got one or two further questions on this before a natural break.
Could you complete them in 5 minutes, do you think?
Yes, easily.
Well, perhaps you should carry on then.
Thank you. Can I ask you then to go to LFB 009142, which is your Exhibit 39. This is the London Risk Register and Planning Assumptions, February 2020. If you go, please, to the top of page 2, point 2, new risks in the NLSRA 2019, you say, in addition to 27 new threats to be assessed, MPS-led, the second one is major fire, R54 LFB. And now, in your second witness statement, you say that the LFB is a lead, and this is paragraph 53 on page 17, I don't think there's a need to go to it, but you say that the LFB is the lead agency in relation to the risk of a major fire, but that the ongoing response to COVID-19 has caused a delay in the implementation of the new risk assessment guidelines. Is that right?
That's correct.
And has that now been completed, do you know?
Yes, so the new risk register was published incorporating this in February 2020.
Right. But the Grenfell Tower fire occurred in 2017. The pandemic took hold in the first quarter of 2020, almost 3 years later. So in the 3 or 2.5 perhaps years between these two events, why did it take so long for an urban or tower block fire to be added to the London Risk Register?
Because we were following the guidance under the National Security Risk Assessment. So that was published fairly soon after in 2017. So it would have probably already been in draft at the time of the fire. Then we were made aware that there would be new methodology coming in with the new risks brought in. So we were awaiting that guidance as to how we implemented that and added it into our risk assessment.
Right. And as part of your consideration of timing, did you have regard to the requirement of the Civil Contingencies Act on Category 1 responders to update the risk assessment, quotes, from time to time, unquotes?
Yes.
You did. And what did you think that meant, from time to time?
So we had a systematic approach to all of the risks that we had available through the local risk assessment guidance or raised by any of the Category 1 responders into a policy. They were reviewed on a 2-year basis, so 4 meetings a year of the London Risk Advisory Group, and they chunked down 15 or so risks at each time. That lead agency responsible for the kind of indicative risk scoring would be brought and presented to the risk advisory group. The group would agree those scorings if there was a deviation from the national guidance, and that would formulate the London risk register. What we didn't want to do is make up a risk that then sat out with the national guidance. We were expecting this guidance to come. There were indications that there would be a change and an introduction of a major fire risk in light of Grenfell and other instances into the London risk, the local risk assessment guidance, which provides a kind of accompanying guidance to the national security risk assessment.
Yes, I see. Thank you. Mr. Chairman, is that a convenient moment?
Yes, thank you very much. Well, Ms. Hetherington, it's time we had a break, get some lunch. So we'll stop there. We'll resume, please, at 2:05. And while you're out of the room, please take care not to discuss your evidence or anything to do with it with anyone else. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Millett. 2:05, please.